Hoje a gente vai assistir um dos melhores vídeos do YouTube. Tô brincando, não é pra tanto, mas é porque o canal desse cara aqui, que a gente vai ver hoje, ele é absurdo em relação à qualidade, não é brasileiro, só que tem legenda em PTBR, ainda bem, porque eu não sou fluente em inglês e imagino que muitos de vocês também não sejam, né? Então, a gente poderia mudar isso? Poderia! Se a gente começasse a estudar inglês, muitas portas se abririam, a gente conseguiria ver uma porrada de conteúdo muito bom, afinal o inglês é a língua falada pelo mundão afora. Agora, e se eu disser que eu posso te ajudar e me ajudar também em relação a isso? Pois é, recentemente fechei parceria aí com a Play English. A metodologia deles é baseada em te ensinar inglês em um universo gamer. Os exemplos que vão te dar vão ter a ver com isso. A forma como você vai aprender inglês é como se você fosse o Nathan Draco, como eles chamam o personagem que eles criaram ali na história, e ele tá tentando descobrir como falar inglês sem saber nada da língua. Então, por observação, ele vai sendo totalmente autodidata e aprendendo sozinho a fazer isso. É muito bacana a forma como eles ensinam. Eu terminei hoje a primeira semana e agora falando um pouco mais de como é que funciona o curso. Você vai ter acesso à aula, que é uma aula com o professor falando 100% inglês com você. Você pode ativar as legendas em PTBR. Só que o bacana é porque por ser tudo inglês, você pode depois reassistir sem legenda e você já vai pegando um pouco mais a naturalidade de entender algumas palavras, como elas são ditas. Então isso faz com que o curso não seja voltado pro público infantil, mas sim pra quem já tem uma mínima noção ali. Você pode ter pouquíssima noção, mas só da gente jogar, a gente já consegue pegar uma palavrinha ou outra, entender certas regrinhas que a gente faz naturalmente na cabeça e já sabe como é que funciona. Agora, ter acesso a essa parte um pouco mais gramatical também tá me ajudando muito, que é quando a gente chega no material que eles disponibilizam pra gente. O Nathan Draco, referências, chegou em uma certa ilha e as pessoas de lá falam inglês, ele fala português, então ele vai anotando tudo no diário, como é que ele tá descobrindo as coisas, e fica muito mais fácil de você entender a língua inglesa da parte mais fundamental mesmo, como é que ela surgiu, sabe? Tanto que tem várias palavras que eu não sabia ter o mesmo significado, só que a mudança de uma pra outra é simplesmente pra dar mais sonoridade. Por isso que o inglês, ele é falado tão gostosinho. Recentemente eu conversei até com o Max sobre isso, e eu tava tentando que meu áudio chegasse no nível de um gringo que eu acompanho que tem um áudio incrível, e ele falou, olha só a diferença. Aí ele falou em inglês, em espanhol, em português. E é muito difícil, porque o inglês, ele é o mais melódico, ele é o que mais meio que fluido, sabe? Esse aqui é o simbolismo do inglês pra mim. Esse aqui seria o português, e esse aqui é o espanhol. Tá ligado? Mulher ser picadinho! Usando o cupom de menor11 _DM35. Eu vou deixar o cupomzinho aí pra você poder copiar e ficar mais fácil, tá? E isso vai dar R$74 por mês, mais ou menos, pra você poder começar seus estudos com inglês, que é algo tão necessário hoje em dia. Inclusive, eu tô fazendo e tá valendo muito a pena. Muito obrigado, Play English, por patrocinar aqui o canal. Tamo junto demais e vamos lá. Bloodborne tem uma história incrível, só que, por ter uma história incrível, eu preciso dizer pra vocês que é muita curiosidade, é muita história, muita interpretação, e por causa disso, eu fiquei obcecado. Eu quis saber tudo do jogo, e eu fiquei 5 horas reagindo a conteúdos de história de Bloodborne. Ai, meu Deus do céu, eu vou ter que resumir bem nesse vídeo aqui os melhores conteúdos. E é claro que aquilo que já foi visto na série, porque o Matias explicou muito bem lá, então aqui eu vou colocar mais aquilo que a gente não viu, e depois a gente vai perambulando aí sobre os vídeos que fizerem mais sentido. Então, eu espero que vocês gostem. Tem muita coisa, esse jogo é incrível, e eu acho que vocês vão gostar bastante, principalmente para aqueles que não são muito acostumados com jogos que entregam a história dessa forma. Então é isso. Se preparem e vamos nessa.
The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. H.P. Lovecraft.
Our eyes are yet to open.
Fear the old blood.
These were the words spoken between Master Willem and Lawrence, from the cautious teacher to the ambitious student. Fear what you do not understand. Fear the old blood. And so our story begins, as you might have guessed, with blood. Ancient blood. Deep below the city of Yharnam lies the ancient underground labyrinth of Tumeru. You know it as the Chalice Dungeons. The old labyrinth was carved out by the Tumerians, superhuman beings that are said to have discovered a sinister truth.
Legal isso daqui. Isso aqui, no final da série, eu até perguntei pro Matias, cara, mas onde é que foi o começo disso tudo? Da onde é que veio o sangue? Pra quem não sabe, eu não vou dar spoiler, tá? Então eu tô só fazendo aqui as perguntas que eu tive lá. O legal é que ele coloca aqui, ó, isso aqui é o item, tá? Tem um item que tem essa descriçãozinha aqui, tá vendo? A legenda tá na frente, ó, mas tá aqui. Inclusive, se você não sabia, tem como mexer a legenda do, do YouTube. Tá um tamanho bem bom, né, pra vocês verem. Daí que eu perguntei pra ele, ele falou, a gente vai fazer as catacumbas, meu Deus, esqueci o nome, as lápides, e daí lá você vai ver mais sobre isso. Isso aqui eu vou fazer em live, tá, pessoal? E provavelmente vai ser na Twitch. Já fica aí a ideia. Eu postei sobre isso na comunidade do YouTube, dá uma olhada lá. Provavelmente a gente vai fazer em live na Twitch, então fiquem preparados. Me sigam nas redes sociais pra saber das novidades. Ou fiquem de olho na comunidade do YouTube também, que eu tô falando tudo por lá.
The hunters had another name for the labyrinth. They called it the Tomb of the Gods. For below, they found traces of
Isso aqui eu
godlike...
acho muito legal dos vídeos dele, ó. Vocês viram aqui? É baseado no diálogo do Guillermo.
Another name for the labyrinth. They called it the Tomb...
Ó, tá vendo? Ó, ele sempre coloca uma fonte aqui embaixo. Fonte, o diálogo do German. Entendeu? Isso aqui é massa porque muito canal brasileiro e tal vai fazer vídeo contando a história e acaba bagunçando o que é a interpretação dele do que realmente tá no jogo. E muitas vezes a interpretação dele tá errada, entendeu? Porque um outro item fala o contrário do que ele tá falando. Então isso aqui é muito massa porque ele coloca tudo certinho e quando ele vai interpretar alguma coisa, ele deixa bem claro que é a interpretação dele, tá? Então é massa. Bom, beleza, eu vou parar de ficar pausando, tá bom? É só porque eu quero explicar as coisas.
Of the gods. For below, they found traces of godlike beings named the Great Ones. The Great Ones could function on transcendental planes of thought, meaning they had elevated their consciousness beyond the physical realm. The benefits of operating on this plane are unclear. Perhaps it was in the name of immortality, or perhaps power, as even beyond, the Great Ones could interfere with beings and events in the waking world. Whatever the case, it is clear that some sort of ascension took place, as there are numerous references to some Great Ones being left behind. Of all the strange life forms that reside in the nooks and crannies of the old labyrinth, the slugs are clear signs of the left behind.
Peraí, vamos colocar isso aqui um pouquinho pra cima aqui. Ele sempre coloca a fonte aqui, né?
Great Ones. One such Great One appears to be abandoned Ebritus, a left-behind being who apparently did not ascend with her brethren. One day, Ebritus would be discovered by the humans above in a crusade that begins with a character named Willem. Master Willem presided over a prestigious place of learning, Bergenworth. Situated by a tranquil lake and secluded within a gigantic forest, Bergenworth housed the mines that would change the world. In fact, everything sacred in Yharnam came to be traced back to Bergenworth, including the most influential characters within our story. Bloodborne's lore is very character-driven, and there are 5 who I'm going to help you become familiar with. There was Master Willem, Runesmith Carol, Lawrence, Mikolash, and German. I'll introduce them to you in the order that they become relevant in the story. As I said, Master Willem was the head of the school at Bergenworth. The man was obsessed with the truth, and believed in pushing the limits of humanity. In almost every dialogue and description, Willem is referred to as Master or Provost, clearly deserving of a great deal of respect. Many would eventually diverge from his tutorage, but few can say that they didn't owe everything to his research, for while Willem presided over Bergenworth, the scholars there discovered terrific things in the tombs below the city of Yharnam.
Once, a group of young Bergenworth scholars discovered a holy medium deep within the tomb. This led to the founding of the Healing Church and the establishment of blood healing.
It's hard to be sure exactly what was found, but we do know it was related to the Great Ones. On the ground floor of Bergenworth
Nossa, cara, os vídeos desse cara aqui são muito delicinha, meu Deus do céu. Nossa, mano, eu só queria comentar isso mesmo.
College, we find the pearl slugs, remnants of the Great Ones, and at the very top of the college, we find the empty phantasm shell, an empty invertebrate shell that is said to be the familiar of a Great One.
Reparem até agora, só dando... Porque foi assim que minha cabeça encaixou mais depois que, né, jogando o jogo, conversando com o Matias e tal. Os eminentes são seres superiores, por assim dizer. Os humanos tentam meio que entender eles e também chegar até eles, porque alguns deles meio que louvam eles, né? Então, o Ebrietas foi um que foi deixado pra trás, então. Ele não ascendeu igual os outros que ascenderam. Então, ele foi um dos que foram deixados pra trás. Ele não tá nesse outro plano igual os outros. E daí ele falou aqui que não sabe qual seria a vantagem deles viverem nesse segundo plano.
After this discovery, whatever it was
Sempre que eu pausar assim, eu vou voltar um pouquinho, só pra
we
gente
find
voltar.
the empty phantasm shell, an empty invertebrate shell that is said to be the familiar of a great one. After this discovery, whatever it was that showed them that the Great Ones existed, the Byrgenwerth scholars launched an inquiry into the Great Ones and the Old Blood.
Caraca, foi depois
For
daquele
from this
itemzinho.
point onwards, there is an explosion of lore and history and references to what the scholars found in the tombs below Yharnam. Many of these references come from runesmith Carol, the second character of our story. Carol transcribed the inhuman utterings of the Great Ones.
Esse aqui é um negócio muito legal, rapidinho comentando. Olha só que até agora ele falou... Muitas das coisas aqui são coisas secundárias no jogo. O Ebrietas, você pode zerar o jogo sem enfrentar ele. Jogos desse tipo, eles não têm medo de colocar coisa no jogo que ninguém nunca vai ver. Sabe? Quer dizer que muita gente não vai ver.
Into what we now call Carol runes. In true Lovecraftian fashion, it is really likely that it's
Vamos dar aquela voltadinha, né?
transcribed come from runesmith Carol, the second character of our story. Carol transcribed the inhuman utterings of the Great Ones into what we now call Carol runes. In true Lovecraftian fashion, it is really likely that it's impossible for humans to comprehend the speech of the Great Ones, but Carol apparently had a knack, a talent, for creating a visual representation of the Great Ones' words.
Isso é tipo na língua dos
The hunter
bichos.
who receives this workshop tool can etch Carol runes into their mind to attain their wondrous strength. Provost Willem would have been proud of Carol's runes, as they do not rely upon blood in any measure. This statement is curious. It tells us three things. First, Provost Willem and Carol were close, as Willem would have been proud of him. And second, Willem didn't have a chance to be proud, so it's possible that the two lost contact. And thirdly, and most importantly, Willem would have been proud because the runes did not rely on blood. In other words, Willem did not approve the use of the old blood, the blood found in the Tomb of the Gods. The Metamorphosis rune states, the discovery of blood made their dream of evolution a reality. Metamorphosis and the excesses and deviation that followed was only the beginning. Willem believed in a different path. He believed in attaining more insight, for humanity's eyes had yet to open. The Eye rune states that Master Willem looked to beings from higher planes for guidance, and sought to line his brain with eyes in order to elevate his thoughts. And with these descriptions, you should have some idea of the scale of ambition of these characters. With the discovery of beings greater than them came a desire to ascend into godhood, to push humanity into its next stage of evolution. The only question was, how? Blood or insight? And this was a question that split the ranks of the Byrgenwerth scholars.
Nossa, eu fiquei todo
It's
arrepiado
how we
aqui.
arrived at the cutscene we started at
Nessa parte
earlier
específica,
with
tipo,
Master
caramba, que foda ver eles dessa forma, né?
or insight. And this was a question that split the ranks
Ver a
of the
história dessa
Byrgenwerth
forma.
scholars. It's how we arrived at the cutscene we started at earlier with Master Willem and Lawrence parting ways.
Master Willem, I've come to bid you farewell.
Oh, I know. You think now to betray me.
From this cutscene, we can infer that Lawrence was a high-ranking
Vamos
student of
só rapidinho pausando aqui, só pra falar. Tenta entender esse universo, sabe? Desacopla a nossa realidade e tenta entrar nessa realidade aqui, em que eles descobriram esse tipo de coisa, e daí surgiu outra parada. É a mesma coisa de quando você vê as histórias mais conhecidas hoje, como vamos lá, Hogwarts, por exemplo, né? O universo de Hogwarts ali do Harry Potter. Cara, aquilo ali muda tudo, como as pessoas vão agir, como elas vão se basear dali pra frente, sabe? Porque essa coisinha a mais naquele universo, essa forma de funcionar as coisas, muda tudo. Então, é muito legal você tentar entrar nesse universo aqui e entender a partir dele. Isso aí acontece muito com Elden Ring, eu sempre gosto de usar essa referência, porque é um pouco difícil de você engolir o Elden Ring no início, a história dele, até você entender como funciona meio que a física do jogo depende das runas que estão no Anel Prístino, no Elden Ring. Então, se, por exemplo, tirarem a runa da morte, as pessoas não morrem mais. Só que elas não deixam de não morrer, mas elas renascem, revivem, levantam de volta e não morrem, entendeu? Então, esse tipo de coisa assim foi mais difícil pra eu engolir, eu tô passando pra vocês pra ver se, sabe, entendendo isso, talvez fique um pouco mais fácil de entender quem não tá muito acostumado.
Master Willem, because firstly, Lawrence refers to Willem as Master, And secondly, Willem clearly regards Lawrence highly enough.
Calma aí, deixa eu só voltar um pouquinho, que demora um pouquinho pra voltar no pique. Aí,
From
boa.
this cutscene, we can infer that Lawrence was a high-ranking student of Master Willem, because firstly, Lawrence refers to Willem as Master, and secondly, Willem clearly regards Lawrence highly enough to call this departure a betrayal.
No, but you will never listen.
Lawrence disagrees. He does not see it as betrayal, and here we come to the heart of what their disagreement is about. Essentially, it boils down to the difference between
Lawrence
the two
acredita no
resources in the
sangue, né?
game. Willem believes man requires insight and knowledge to ascend.
Ó, o
Lawrence
discernimento aí.
believes in the power of blood. Lawrence attempts to reassure Willem, telling him he will always fear the old blood, but that this fear will not stop him using it.
I tell you, I will not forget our adage.
Nossa, em inglês a
We
dublagem é
are
muito melhor.
born of the blood, made men by the blood, undone by the blood. Our eyes are yet to open.
Fear the old blood.
Uma coisa que eu ainda tô na dúvida, e vocês também devem estar, talvez ele vá falar depois pra fazer um plot mais legal, só que o sangue antigo é o sangue de eminente, certo? Não é qualquer sangue. Eu também tô na dúvida agora.
I must take my leave.
Lawrence leaves the Bergenworth scholars, presumably with a small group of rebels, and goes on to found the Healing Church.
Ah, o
Willem
Lawrence que
remains at
fez a Igreja da
Bergenworth and
Cura.
attempts to elevate his
Nossa,
thoughts
que
to
doideira. Então era tipo o melhor aluno. Nossa, isso aí eu não peguei. O Matias deve ter me explicado, só que eu não peguei. Caramba, que legal.
a higher plane. He will return to our story at a later time, so while I tell you of what Lawrence went on to do, imagine Willem here in Bergenworth, sitting in his rocking chair over the lake, musing on how to acquire insight and elevate his thoughts to a higher plane. Everything Lawrence would come to achieve was based on the knowledge he had come by in Bergenworth. In retrospect, we clearly see why Willem saw Lawrence's departure as a betrayal. Perhaps Willem himself even planted these ideas in Lawrence's mind. A note in the lecture hall reads, "Master Willem was right. Evolution without courage will be the ruin of our race." Lawrence had courage, but it is likely that his courage bordered on arrogance. The Bergenworth student uniform states, "The Healing Church has its roots in Bergenworth and naturally borrows heavily from its uniform design. The focus not on knowledge or thought, but on pure pretension would surely bring Master Willem to despair if only he knew." So Lawrence threw caution to the wind and put his faith in the old blood. Think on human history. Imagine if, in any era, a church was founded that had access to a substance that could cure any illness. Imagine if this church gave it freely to a city, how powerful that city would become, and how powerful the church would become within it. This is exactly what happened in Yharnam. People came far and wide to be treated with the miraculous blood of the gods, and the people of Yharnam put their faith in the Healing Church. In fact, what happened in Yharnam is eerily similar to what happened in the tombs deep below, where the blood was originally found, and as you know, many Chalice dungeons, especially those of Loran, are now overrun by horrific beasts. The Lower Loran Chalice states, "There are trace remains of medical procedures in parts of ailing Loran. Whether these were attempts to control the scourge of the beasts, or the cause of the outbreak, is unknown." The ailing Loran Chalice states, "The tragedy that struck this ailing land of Loran is said to have its root in the scourge of the beast. Some have made the dreaded extrapolation that Yharnam may be next." Yharnam was next. Through overuse of the healing blood, the city would eventually succumb to the scourge of the beast. Until then, though, Lawrence and the Healing Church managed to grow in power with the miraculous healing properties of their special, yet infected, blood.
A gente se
Yharnam
furando aí,
grows to
pegando um
become a
pouquinho de
city
sangue.
of worship and fear. As you explore throughout the city, you see the influence of the church everywhere. With Yharnam's resources, Lawrence clearly had the power to grow the church beyond what would have been possible at Bergenworth. All the while, he continued exploring the labyrinth below Yharnam. The Tomb Prospector set reads, "Attire of the Tomb Prospectors who explore the old labyrinth on behalf of the Healing Church. The Healing Church traces its roots to Bergenworth and is therefore aware of the ruins' true importance.
Cara, isso aí
These
tudo a gente vai
ruins
fazer em
contain
live,
much
mano.
more than hunter trinkets. Indeed, they hide the very secrets of the old Great Ones.
É tudo secundário
sought
essas
after by
lápis, só
those
que tem
with the
muita
insight
história.
to imagine greatness. On top of this, Lawrence split the church into multiple branches, each with a different purpose. There was the choir, the school of mensis, and the workshop. We'll get to these branches as they become appropriate, but the main purpose of the church, at least to the people of Yharnam, was the administration of blood healing. Within the grand cathedral itself lies a note that says, "Heir to the ritual of blood, purveyor of ministration, place your hand upon the altar's sacred covering and inscribe Master Lawrence's adage upon your flesh." Blood ministers would have been those who administered the blood healing. How else would the people of Yharnam be so obsessed with blood? In Yharnam, they produced more blood than alcohol, as the former is more intoxicating.
Caraca.
However, the ministration of blood was likely a means to an end, for the Healing Church still intended to commune with the Great Ones, in hopes of ascending humanity to a higher plane. This task was given to the choir, a group who were a part of the Healing Church.
Ó, aqui, ó.
Members of the choir.
É legal porque quando ele começa a falar do coro, ele já mostra o ambiente do coro aqui, ó. E aqui, isso aqui tudo é secundário do jogo. Tudo. Isso aqui é o convite de King Rush, né? Que você pode vir pra cá.
For the Healing Church still intended to commune with the Great Ones, in hopes of
Realmente,
ascending
bem aqui em
humanity
cima,
to a
bem
higher
aqui em cima, tem um negocinho que eles usavam pra se comunicar com os eminentes. Um símbolo, assim, que é tipo esse movimento, assim. Assim. Uma mãozinha pra lá e outra pra cima. Eu lembro mais ou menos aí. Tomara que eu não esteja falando do lugar errado, mas eu acho que é bem aqui onde tá essas luzinhas.
higher plane. This task was given to the choir, a group who were a part of the Healing Church. Members of the choir are both the highest-ranking clerics of the Healing Church and scholars who continued the work that began at Bergenworth. The eye covering indicates their debt to the teachings of Master Willem,
Ó, que legal.
even though their paths diverged.
Tá vendo, ó? Eles ainda meio que tinha o seu agradecimento, né? Como é que ele falou aqui? É a sua dívida com os ensinamentos de Mestre Willem.
It's their debt to the teachings of Master Willem, even though their paths diverged.
A gente
The
chegou a ler
choir,
esse item.
garbed in black and white, with the familiar eye covering, occupied the upper cathedral ward. It seems to have been their job to
Por isso que eles eram
research and
vestidos de
make
preto e
contact
branco.
with the Great Ones. The Great Is Chalice became the cornerstone of the choir, the elite delegation of the Healing Church. It was also the first great chalice brought back to the surface since the time of Bergenworth and allowed the choir to have audience with Ebritus. Ebritus was the left-behind Great One, who came to reside below the Grand Cathedral. We are told that the Grand Cathedral is the birthplace of the Healing Church's special blood, and if the Church were indeed using the blood of the Great Ones, then who's to say it wasn't Ebritus's blood?
Caraca.
The Augur of Ebritus is one of the secret rites of the choir.
Esse foi o início, então. Eles tiravam sangue do Ebrietas, que foi o deixado pra trás. E assim começou tudo. Tudo.
Used by the high-ranking members of the Healing Church. Use
Mas
phantasms.
peraí, eles falaram também do Ptumeriano, né? Que é o que aparece lá naqueles cálices. Não é cálice, é as lápides dos cálices. Eu já tinha falado de cálice anteriormente, falei de lápide também, a cálice dos lápides. As lápides dos cálices, tá?
The invertebrates known to be augurs of the Great Ones, to partially summon abandoned Ebritus, one of the few rites that allow one to directly utilize the power of the Great Ones and evidence that the choir had approached the eldritch truth. The Augur of Ebritus is an arcane method of fighting that was actually shared with the second subsection of the Healing Church, the School of Mensis. The upper echelons of the Healing Church are formed by the School of Mensis.
Caraca, mas tem muito
based in
escalão,
Yanseen
né?
Village.
Escalão alto, mais
This
alto
brings us
ainda.
to our next important character, Mikolash, who was likely the head of the School of Mensis. The School of Mensis was, as the name implies, a place of learning,
Lembrando de
research,
novo, tá? Sempre que ele tá falando de algo, ele tá mostrando esse algo, tá? Então esse aqui é o Mikolash. Isso aí pra quem não acompanha a série, né? Ou nunca jogou o jogo.
and experimentation for the Healing Church
Só voltar
was,
pouco.
as the name implies, a place of learning, research, and experimentation for the Healing Church. Their student set reads, "The Healing Church has its roots in Bergenworth and naturally borrows heavily from its uniform design. The school was based below Yharnam in a place called Yahagul, the Unseen
Yahagul.
Village. Clearly, the work of Mensis was intended to be kept a secret from the people of Yharnam. In fact, as time went on, the school increasingly seems to have been working alone, even separately from the Healing Church itself.
Olha só.
The Yahagul attire tells us, The hunters of Yahar'gul answer to the village's founders, the School of Mensis. Hunters in name only, these kidnappers blend into the night wearing this attire. These were not true hunters. That title was saved for the third subsection of the Healing Church,
Terceira
the Hunters
subseção.
of the Workshop. These
Caçadores da
capable
oficina.
warriors of the church appeared as the scourge of the beast began to show in Yharnam. The workshop hunters served under Gurman, the first hunter, who you're all familiar with.
Tô
The
doido pra
hunter
saber a
attire
história dele.
reads, one of the standard articles
Digo,
of hunter attire.
Já sei, né? Mas vê ela mesclada aqui no vídeo do cara, entendeu? Porque eu já tenho noção já graças ao Machola.
You're all familiar with. The hunter attire reads, one of the standard articles of hunter attire fashioned at the workshop, a fine piece of hunter attire that provides stable defense to anyone facing Yharnam's beastly threat, allows one to stalk beasts unannounced by cover of night. It's
Olha,
possible the unannounced part of that sentence is to do with killing beasts.
isso foi o meu WhatsApp. O WhatsApp deu um grito aqui, eu preferi, né, mutar
It's possible
bonitinho,
the
não atrapalhar.
unannounced part of that sentence is to do with killing beasts without them noticing you, but it could also be because the workshop was a secret institution. The original workshop
Ó,
is
nessas partes
located
assim, ó, viu que é meio que interpretativo? Pode ter dois significados. Aí daí você usa uma informação, une com outra e vê, opa, isso aqui faz sentido porque faz sentido.
in a very hard to find part of Cathedral Ward, and think about it, you don't want the townsfolk believing that the blood is turning them into beasts. When that information is floating around, you want to avoid panic at all costs. So the hunters hunted beasts under the cover of night, but the hunters and the beastly scourge couldn't stay a secret forever. In what would come to be called Old Yharnam, a new disease appeared. It was called Ashen Blood. I call it a disease,
Sangue
but the
pálido.
small
A doença sangue pálido. Isso aqui a gente vê o tempo inteiro no jogo. Eles chamavam de doença, mas os comprimidos utilizados para o tratamento... Ele vai falar mais. Eu achava que sangue pálido, na verdade, era sangue de eminente. Só que eles estão falando do sangue antigo e do sangue pálido. São coisas diferentes. Bom, vamos entender. É uma nova doença isso aqui.
medicinal tablets used to treat it actually counteract poison. A tablet used to treat Ashen Blood, the baffling sickness that ravaged Old Yharnam long ago. These tablets only provide short-term relief. The Ashen Blood ailment eventually triggered the spread of the beastly scourge. Think about that. We know that the old blood heals every illness. We know that the old blood causes the beastly scourge, and we now know that the Ashen Blood caused the beastly scourge to spread. In short, it seems like people were infected with the Ashen Blood, and the medicine that they had only provided short-term relief, and they were forced to imbibe the old blood instead. It's even possible that the Healing Church used this Ashen Blood to gain power, swooping in with this miracle cure and liberating the people from the Ashen Blood disease. Since Ashen Blood seems poisonous in nature, perhaps the Church even poisoned the populace just for that excuse to use the old blood, because that excuse to get the populace to believe in you, that would have been so powerful. But whatever the case, the beastly scourge was triggered overwhelmingly.
Nossa, mas ficou muito confuso isso daqui agora. Eu boiei porque, então, usavam o sangue, aí daí ficaram com a doença do sangue pálido, aí daí usavam os comprimidos pra passar a doença, só que era de curta duração, daí tinha que usar mais. Eu boiei um pouco. Eu boiei um pouquinho, vou ser bem sincero, tá? O flagelo da fera é exatamente quando eles começam a virar fera, certo? Aí ele falou que um deles causou e o outro espalhou. Eu boiei um pouco nessa explicação aqui. Eu queria, inclusive, ver se tem como ver ele explicando de novo sobre o flagelo da fera. Só que eu acho que ele não falou em nenhum momento necessariamente o que é. Falou? Deixa eu ver, tô em 15 e 11, deixa eu procurar aqui. Bom, vamos voltar aqui então pro 15 e 11 pra continuar onde a gente parou. Porque eu não achei ele falando do flagelo da fera explicadinho. Talvez mais pra frente. Já tava falando algumas coisas, que é porque explica tudo.
It was called Ashen Blood. I call it a disease, but the small medicinal tablets used to treat it actually counteract poison.
Tá, eu tô vendo de novo aqui só pra entender, ó. Eles chamavam de doença, mas comprimidos utilizados pro tratamento...
I call it a disease, but the small medicinal tablets used to treat it actually counteract poison. A tablet used to treat Ashen Blood, the baffling sickness that ravaged Old Yharnam long ago. These tablets only provide short-term relief. The Ashen Blood ailment eventually triggered the spread of the beastly scourge. That the old blood causes the beastly scourge, and we now know that the Ashen Blood caused the beastly scourge to spread. In short, it seems like people were infected with the ashen blood, and the medicine that they had only provided short-term relief, and they were forced to imbibe the old blood instead. It's even possible that the healing church used this ashen blood to gain power, swooping in with this
essa teoria
miracle
aqui eu
cure,
consigo entender
and
legal.
literature. Perhaps the church even poisoned the populace just for that excuse to use the old blood, because that excuse to get the populace to believe in you, that would have been so powerful. But whatever the case, the beastly scourge was triggered overwhelmingly in
Foi
old
meio que
Yarnum.
então uma forma de manipular mesmo. Seria isso, né? Bom.
We know that much, to the point where they actually had to burn it down and cordon off Old Yarnum from the rest of the city. The red moon hangs low, and beasts rule the streets. Are we left no other choice than to burn it all to cinders? With this, the hunt became known to all. Perhaps the church feared an uprising from the people of Yarnum, for a note in central Yarnum reads, "When the hunt began, the healing church left us, blocking the great bridge to Cathedral Ward as Old Yarnum burned to the ground that moonlit night." As a result, Gurman's workshop was sealed and closed. With the scourge of the beast known to all, perhaps there was no need for secrecy anymore. The Saw Hunter badge comes to read, "Badge crafted long ago at the workshop, attests to one's prowess as a hunter of beasts. The workshop is gone, and no group recognizes this meaningless badge." At this point, the church retreats. They block themselves off in Upper Cathedral Ward and come up with a new strategy for dealing with the scourge of the beasts that is spreading throughout Yarnum. Eventually, the workshop hunters would disband, and the church founded the Church Hunter Workshop in its place. Ludwig was the chief hunter of the healing church, which
com a
consisted of
espadona dele aí.
hunters garbed in black.
Eu não usei a espadona do Ludwig na série, só que foi a primeira coisa que eu peguei, assim que acabou a série. E daí eu dei uns upgrades nela e caramba, mano, que espada delícia. Essa grandona aqui que tá nas costas dele.
Ludwig was the
Essa aqui, ó.
chief hunter of the healing church.
Tipo, é uma espada fininha, mas daí ele enfia dentro da bainha e ela vira uma longsword sinistra desse tamanho aqui. É muito legal de usar ela. E tá sendo, tipo, minha principal junto com o cutelo. Eu fico com ela e o cutelo. Bom, vocês vão ver na
Which
live.
consisted of hunters garbed in black and white. The black church hunter attire reads, "Most healing church hunters are elementary doctors who understand the importance of early prevention of the scourge, achieved by disposing of victims, even potential victims, before signs of sickness manifest themselves. Their black attire is synonymous with fear and that peculiar Yarnum madness. The black church hunter's job was clear. Remove any sign of the scourge of the beast, even if it hasn't manifested itself
Caraca,
yet.
que doideira.
The fear that it inspired in the citizens shows. Most in Upper Cathedral Ward are deathly afraid of the church. The white church hunters' jobs were a bit...
Vocês viram? Então, os caçadores que vestiam preto matava qualquer um que tivesse o mínimo... se fosse um mundo de zumbi, opa, vi uma mordidinha no seu dedão do pé. Tchau, amigo. Vai com Deus. Doideira. E eles eram os antigos caras que participavam da igreja, né? E uma coisa que eu acho muito legal, que eu queria até comentar aqui, é porque eu acho que foi o primeiro Souls-like que eu joguei, que o seu protagonista, o personagem que você joga, ele é um caçador, então ele tem habilidades, sabe? Parece que ele sabe o que ele tá fazendo. Por isso que é um jogo que eu achei mais fácil, porque a gente se move mais rápido. Então, quando a gente mira em alguém, ele dá um pulo, assim, mais ágil. Os ataques, parece que as armas são feitas pra alguém que sabe usar elas. Então, ele usa bem as armas, sabe? Coisa que... Tanto que quando eu usei... Foi a única coisa que eu não gostei, inclusive, da Moonlight desse jogo, porque ele ataca meio... Ele só balança ela assim, né? Ele pega aqui assim e faz assim, ó. Sabe? E parece que é o golpe mais Dark Souls no Bloodborne que eu vi. Porque todas as outras ele usa bem. Essa daqui, inclusive, grandona, ele ataca com ela, tipo, de uma forma legal. Quando você joga todos os outros Souls-like, você vai ver que se você pega uma arma grande, ele vai atacar como se tivesse, tipo, caraca, mano, como é que eu vou usar um bagulho desse tamanho, velho? Sabe? Quando ele tá com uma espadinha pequena, ele ataca, tipo, eu não sei usar esse bagulho, sabe? É mais ou menos isso. Então, o único protagonista que você se sente foda jogando, tipo, caraca, mano, eu sou foda, velho.
different. These doctors are superiors to the black
É o famoso, eu não tô preso aqui com vocês estão presos aqui comigo, tá ligado?
preventative hunters and specialists in
Peraí, vamos aqui ver os caçadores. Aí, ó.
The white church hunters' jobs
Isso aqui.
were a bit different. These doctors are superiors to the black preventative hunters and specialists in experimentally backed blood ministration and the scourge of the beast. They believe that medicine is not a means of treatment, but rather a method of research, and that some knowledge can only be attained by exposing oneself to sickness. Their
Por isso a Amélia se transforma?
experimentation might explain the monstrously large church giants who would have been particularly useful in the fight against the beasts. Ludwig's greatsword exhibits several departures from the workshop's design,
Caraca, então eles se transformavam meio que pra usar isso a... Nossa.
suggesting that the church anticipated much larger, inhuman beasts. On top of this, Ludwig took a much more overt approach to beast hunting. Nightly, he would embark upon central Yharnam, across the Great Bridge, to fight back against the beasts. But he was not alone. The population of central Yharnam joined the hunt as well, swelling the ranks of the hunters. Ludwig, the first hunter of the Healing Church, once recruited Yharnamites to serve as hunters. This hunter's attire was made for new recruits and has excellent straightforward defense, but not nearly enough to allow an ordinary man to stand any real chance against the beasts. It sounds like a very clever move, as it probably stopped the populace blaming the church and likely formed more of a us versus them mentality. Meanwhile, in Byrgenwerth, Master Willem had an
E esse negócio aí de nós contra eles funciona bem, hein? A gente vê isso aí acontecendo sempre, principalmente quando tem a ver aí com certas, né?
epiphany. We are thinking on the basest of planes. What we need are more eyes. Willem took this very literally. The remaining students of Byrgenwerth appear to have been transformed into multi-eyed, fly-like creatures, and more importantly, Willem himself found an umbilical cord of a Great One, which was a very significant and powerful artifact. Provost Willem sought the cord in order to elevate his being and thoughts to those of a Great One by lining his brain with eyes, the only choice he knew if man were ever to match their greatness. Used to gain insight, and, so they say, eyes on the inside, although no one remembers what that truly entails. It's difficult to know exactly how Willem came across or created an umbilical cord, so we'll have to go into that in another video. Just know that he has one for now. When we encounter Willem, he directs us to the Great Lake. The power of great bodies of water is actually referenced in a few runes. Great volumes of water serve as a bulwark guarding sleep, and an augur of the Eldritch truth. Overcome this hindrance and seek what is yours.
Nossa, é impressionante como os textos do jogo são difíceis de entender, né? Tipo, ele falando agora, eu fiquei tipo, tá, a água, grande quantidade, faz... Foi isso que eu vi aqui.
The Eldritch truth. Overcome this hindrance and seek what is yours. The lake and what lies within it.
Agora chega a parte que ele explica e fica gostosinho, né?
hides the truth. Rom, the Byrgenwerth spider, lies within.
Gente, isso daqui, vamos combinar que isso aqui não é uma aranha, é um carrapato? Parece muito mais um carrapato. Olha o tamanhozinho dessas perninhas, mano.
And there's a lot we don't know about her, but I'll tell you what we do know. The Byrgenwerth spider hides all manner of rituals and keeps our lost master from us. A terrible shame. The spider is certain to reveal nothing, for true enlightenment need not be shared. I believe this is what the vacuous part...
Ele lendo o negócio enquanto tomava uma sabugada dessa tia. Também matar ela é um insuportável, mano. Olha lá, ele correu aqui pra gravar o vídeo, pegou a cena. Olha ela vindo. Sabugou. Toma.
I believe this is what the vacuous part of Rom's name refers to. This creature is somehow hiding the true nature of the world, and when you defeat it, you don't need insight to see the world for what it truly is. The night moves forward. The blood moon descends, and after killing Rom, we are finally granted access to what remains of Yahar'gul, home of Mikolash and his school of Mensis.
Aí, ó, depois de matar a Rom, ele falou ali que a gente precisava de discernimento pra ver as coisas, que é um númerozinho que tem no jogo ali de olhinho, que é quando você tá, tipo, meio que saindo da ignorância, por assim dizer, adquirindo conhecimento, e daí, a partir do momento que você mata a Rom, você não precisa mais. Esse bichão aqui em cima, que é tipo uma amidala, que a gente enfrenta um boss que é igualzinho a ele e chama amidala, a gente só conseguia ver com discernimento, agora não precisa mais. Aí, ó, ela tá sempre visível, esse bichão aqui, a mãozinha dela aqui, a cara dela aqui.
The School of Mensis appears to have grown apart from the Healing Church and the choir.
E várias outras coisas
There's little
também.
information on Mikolash and his school, but we can prove that there was a split. Firstly, Mikolash uses the Augur of Abritus, a secret rite of the choir shared among the high-ranking members of the Healing Church.
Ele tá falando desse poder que o Mikolash usa. Isso aí é tipo um ataque da Ebrietas ali, né? A ideia é aquela coisa, ó. Ele começando a pegar os itens, lendo os itens, e por que essas pessoas que têm os itens... É muito doido, porque esses jogos meio que você é jogado em um mundo que tudo já aconteceu e você pode tentar descobrir o que aconteceu lá ou só sair batendo nos bonecos. Se você tiver um perfil um pouco mais investigativo, você vai amar esse jogo, esse tipo de jogo, porque você precisa meio que aquele item tava com aquele cara e daí você liga com o negócio, sabe? Isso é muito massa, mano. Tá, voltei um pouquinho mais aqui só porque agora que eu falei, talvez vamos prestar
From
atenção
the
de novo.
Healing Church and the choir, there is little information on Mikolash and his school, but we
Mikolash é aquele
can
bicho
prove
lá,
that
aquele
there was
cara.
a split. Firstly, Mikolash uses the Augur of
Ele
Abritus,
usa o auguro
a
de
secret rite
Ebrietas.
of the choir,
Aí esse cara
shared
aí
among the high-ranking
usa esse
members of
golpe.
the Healing Church. This suggests he was trusted with this information and was once a sane member of the church. To prove that there was a split between the Healing Church's choir and the school, we note clear signs of distrust and fighting between the groups. Imprisoned inside Yahar'gul is the corpse of a member of the choir, and inside the Nightmare of Mensis, we find who the official guide calls Edgar, choir intelligence. Clearly, the choir was suspicious of what was going on in Yahar'gul.
É legal, ó, que ele soltou aquela informação de que eles tinham algum certo tipo de... Não inimizade, mas de... Eles não se davam bem. E daí ele pega algumas informações, um carinha... Aquilo ali é puro cenário. Só que daí aquele cenário que parece besta... Olha só aqui, ó. Isso aqui pra mim foi só cenário. Só que daí você vê, esse cara aqui é um cara do coro. E ele tá numa área de não sei o que lá. Então dá pra ver que, tipo... Eles tinham uma certa inimizade aqui, entendeu? Tem outra palavra, mas esqueci. Sinônimo de inimizade, por aí.
And inside the Nightmare of Mensis, we find who the official guide calls
E
Edgar,
agora tô falando desse cara
choir
aí, ó, o Edgar.
intelligence. Clearly, the choir was suspicious of what was going on in Yahar'gul with the School of Mensis, and based on what we find there in Yahar'gul, it seems the choir had good reason to be. The School of Mensis were attempting to commune with the Great Ones, and they succeeded. As Willem did, they found an umbilical cord. We find 4 chords in the game that allow contact with the Great Ones, and Mikolash had one. This cord granted Mensis audience with Murgo, but resulted in the stillbirth of their brains. As we know, most Great Ones reside in the Nightmare Realm, and whatever ritual they performed with this cord ripped Mensis and its students into a nightmare. That's why you find the
por
lecture
isso.
hall in the
Olha só o que aconteceu com eles. Por isso que a gente entra no pesadelo. E eles estão lá. Chupou todo mundo pra lá, mano. Ó, essa galera toda aqui, que era da rapaziada do Mensis. Esse aqui é o Mikolash, né? No caso, da Universidade de Mensis. Pera, é Mensis? É isso, né? Mikolash da Universidade de Mensis, né? É o Tragou... Não, Mensis. Ah, não, Tragou... Esse aqui é o Mensis. Gente, eu me perdi. Mensis não é o Mikolash, né? É? Não é? Aí.
reside in the
Buguei por
Nightmare
segundo.
Realm, and whatever ritual they performed with this cord ripped Mensis and its students into a nightmare. That's why you find the lecture hall in the nightmare, and that's why there's hundreds of dead students throughout Yahar'gul, all wearing the cage that appears to have delivered them to their harrowing nightmare. Mikolash's corpse provides a gateway into
Aí,
the
ó,
nightmare.
o cadáver de Mikolash. Ai, agora eu tô perdido. Quem é Mensis, mano? Vamos continuar, vai.
And we find him here, clearly insane, wandering the halls. Mikolash believes that it's possible to ascend towards becoming a great one, citing Rom as his example. Rom, however, is not fully
Essa fala
developed.
dele aqui é muito bom. Ele fica repetindo essa fala durante a luta dele. Como fizeste com a vaga Rom. É um negócio assim.
She has the blood of their kin. And let's just go back to Rom for a second. When you defeat Rom, Queen Yharnam appears. She's a Tumerian woman who has clearly suffered a childbirth gone horribly wrong. She is linked to the nightmare of Mensis, to the ritual that Rom was hiding, and she appears in this nightmare looking up towards Murgo's loft, where Murgo and his wet nurse reside. Queen Yharnam hails from the Tumerian civilization that was in power long ago, and she was blessed with a child of the Great Ones. From the way she appears outside Murgo's loft, it is clear that her consciousness, her spirit, was pulled into this nightmare as well. Even when you encounter Queen Yharnam's real self in the Tumerian tombs, baby Murgo screams whenever you hit her, and even when you kill Yharnam in the tombs, it is clear that she is not actually dead. But her horrific consciousness is only asleep, and it stirs in unsettling motions. Her consciousness seems to be showing up here in the nightmare, completely separate from her physical form. The same thing is happening with you, with Mikolash, with the Great Ones in the nightmare with you. You all exist in this nightmare that Mensis created.
Ah, é
So your
um
next
pesadelo que
question
Menzies
is,
criou. Mano, quem é Menzies, velho? Esqueci. Bom, acho que ele falou Menzies agorinha, né? O Micolache era um seguidor de Menzies, então ele não é o criador da Universidade de Menzies. Ah, ok. Eu pesquisei aqui, só aparece o pesadelo de Menzies. De fato. Voltamos.
which great one impregnated Yharnam with Murgo all those years ago? I believe it is formless Erden. The great one Erden, lacking form, exists only in voice.
Oh, verdade.
To cite the
Isso
fastest
aqui o Matias tinha comentado também. Tanto que ele fala ali, eu acho, é porque é uma... Isso aqui é interpretação, só que é uma interpretação muito boa, porque o Edon, ele só existia como voz. E daí, essa ama de leite que também é só, tanto... esqueceram de renderizar o rosto dela aqui. O bebê também é só voz.
evidence to present. There's nothing in the cradle after you defeat Murgo, and Murgo himself, the child, has no form. Also, his cries are heard throughout your adventure. He exists everywhere. Additionally, Murgo's wet nurse has no form under those robes. And also, the women that are impregnated when this blood moon descends are all related to Erden. But we'll get to that in another video. When you defeat Murgo's wet nurse, you get a message unlike any other that you've received thus far. Instead of prey slaughtered, you get nightmare slain. You defeated a true Great One that's elevated its consciousness to the nightmare realm, and the game is nearing its end.
Caraca, então a gente realmente enfrentou um iminente.
But all of this should make you think. The Nightmare of Mensis isn't the only dream world I've set foot in, is it?
Onírico.
This entire time I've actually been journeying out from the hunter's dream, guided by lanterns that led me to Murgo and her wet nurse, all of which is made possible by German and his doll. Travel to the hunter's workshop in the waking world and seek the truth. Every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. Next to the cord is the unanimated doll. Take a hairpin from this real
Essa parte aqui, encontrar isso daqui realmente é muito louco no jogo, mano.
doll and then pass it along to the doll in the dream. When you give her the hairpin, she sheds a single tear, which reads, "Created from the shining silver doll tear, this blood gem is a quiet yet unfaltering friend that continually restores HP, the life essence of a hunter. Perhaps this doll's creator had wished for such a friend, albeit in vain. It's clear
Tadinho do
that German
German.
called upon the Great Ones using an umbilical cord, similar to the manner in which Mikolash did. The Great Ones that inhabit the nightmare are sympathetic in spirit and often answer when called upon. German, lonely and lacking purpose after the church had no more need for his workshop, must have called upon the Great Ones. A Great One responded, the pale moon presence, and imprisoned German within the dream. For while German sleeps, he utters this rare piece of dialogue that clearly shows he does not want to be here.
Oh, Lawrence, Master Willem, somebody help me. Unshackle me, please. Anybody.
Eu não vi isso.
I've had enough of this dream. The night blocks all sight. Oh, somebody, please.
Caraca,
So for what
mano.
purpose was the dream conceived? Well, the doll tells us that countless hunters have passed through here, and all of the graves tell us that as well. And Eileen and Jura both have dialogue that is testament to that fact. They talk about how they've been through this dream before as well. So why are hunters being sent through this dream, unable to pass away, just forced to go out into the world and kill beasts? It becomes clearer when you kill Murgo's wet nurse. You return to the hunter's workshop burning down, the dream's purpose fulfilled. Ergo, the purpose of your dream and your hunt appears to have been to slay a great one. 3 endings are presented to you.
Aqui é realmente quando você já pode finalizar o jogo, gente. O jogo, se você fizer só o que é necessário, é muito rapidinho, tá?
The first. German offers you a way out of the dream. He asks you to accept your death, for if you do, then you'll awaken in the waking world of Yharnam, and your consciousness will be no longer linked to the dream. The trophy for this ending reads, "You lived through the hunt and saw another day." The second option is to reject German. He suggests that to do so must be a decision caused by madness, and he pits his will against yours to forcibly remove you from the dream. All the while, he entreats you to accept your death and be freed from this dream. If you overpower German, we meet with the moon presence, the being that appears to have conceived this nightmare. Just like the nightmare Murgo conceived, it embraces you, and in the cutscene to follow, we see ourselves performing the same role that German did, hosting the dream, likely a slave to the moon presence,
Caraca,
or
realmente é só
perhaps its
escravo.
surrogate child, guiding hunters
Talvez o
throughout the
quê?
slave to the moon presence,
Não
or
li.
perhaps its surrogate child, guiding hunters throughout this dream in an effort to slay other great ones.
Mas por que que essa presença da lua iria querer que... Ah tá, mas a gente guia os outros pra matar iminentes de uma forma como se fosse uma vingança contra a presença da lua? Ou é algo que a presença da lua quer? Reflitão.
The trophy for this ending reads, "Captivated by the moon presence, you pledge to watch over the hunter's dream." There's one key thing you need to remember. The Great Ones are a race, but they're a race unlike any other. Each Great One is entirely unique, and they do not necessarily work together. In fact, from the existence of the dream, I'm almost inclined to believe that the moon presence is hostile towards other
Tá
Great Ones.
explicado, tá a resposta.
In the third and final ending,
Ó, eu fiz as duas perguntas coerentes e ele respondeu usando o que ele acha. Não necessariamente que é isso, mas, bom.
you consume 3
Só
umbilical
deixando claro, eu concordo com ele, porque, né?
cords and resist the
Peraí,
will.
peraí.
Third and
A terceira
final
e última
moon
conclusão,
presence
vamos
is
lá.
hostile towards other Great Ones. In the third and final ending, you consume 3 umbilical cords and resist the will of the moon presence. You overpower it, and in the cutscene to follow, the doll
A gente, pra chegar nesse final, a gente tem que comer pelo menos 3 cordões umbilicais, que daí vai deixar a gente com muito discernimento. A gente é como se tivesse ficado muito inteligente. Na verdade, agora a gente vendo aqui, a gente sabe que não é bem isso, né? O discernimento é algo que, pelo menos seguindo o mestre Willan, quanto mais você tem, mais próximo você tá de chegar ao nível deles. E aqui é isso, quando você chega, pega os 3, você consegue lutar contra ela, contra esse eminente, porque você superou o poder dela, igual ele falou. E daí sai no X1.
of the moon presence. You overpower it, and in the cutscene to follow, the doll coddles the being you have become. You have ascended, truly, as few have before you. The trophy description states, "You became an infant great one, lifting humanity into its next childhood." So, after the end of all this, you probably still have questions. What is pale blood? Why does the moon presence guide hunters towards killing beasts and great ones? Which ending is the good ending? For all this and more, you need to be subscribed to the channel. I'll have another video out soon analysing the endings, and from here on out, the channel should split into 3 main parts. There's going to be the lore hunting series, where we focus on one aspect of the lore and really figure it out. There's going to be Prepare to Cry, which is my favourite series. It's a series where I tell the story of a character within Bloodborne's universe, and there's going to be Things You Missed, which are short, enjoyable episodes that showcase an area of the game and tell you everything that you missed within it. The criteria for these episodes is generally, if I find something I think I missed, or something I did miss, then I include it in that episode. So those are the 3 main series we're going to have. There's also going to be other videos, of course, but those are the 3 main series. I'm still
Não,
thinking of
incrível,
doing
incrível. Cara, o conteúdo desse cara é um absurdo. Só que, felizmente, como eu estou em React, e ele já deve ter postado esses vídeos, deixa eu ver se eu acho que eu tô curioso. Pessoal, dá só uma olhada, tem bastante coisa aqui no canal dele, tá? Tem uma playlist inteira com 18 vídeos falando muita coisa legal de Bloodborne aqui, tenho certeza disso. Vamos tentar ver os mais interessantes. Ó, aqui são coisas que ele deixou passar. Então, pessoal, depois de terminar de ver o vídeo, esse vídeo que vocês acabaram de ver, eu tô aqui há mais ou menos 2 horas e meia depois que isso acabou. Pois é, eu continuei assistindo vários dos outros vídeos. Eu vi esse daqui porque, bom, é aqui que ele começa a falar sobre a DLC, The Old Hunters. Só que ele conta a história de um jeito um pouco diferente do que a gente acabou de ver. E hoje em dia ele não faz mais isso, só que nessa época aqui, há 7 anos atrás, 8 anos atrás, ele, assim que lançou a DLC, ele fez um vídeo meio que jogando a DLC, mostrando a experiência dele da DLC, não necessariamente jogando ao vivo, mas mostrando a experiência dele e contando a história do que ele via em tempo real. Não em tempo real, na verdade, mas do que ele entendia daquela primeira gameplay dele. Só que isso é muito diferente pros dias de hoje, porque, bom, a gente já sabe de tudo durante a gameplay, que foi o que a gente entendeu enquanto a gente jogou, né, e com o Matias falando. Então eu queria um pouquinho a mais, e me faltou. Então, eu saí comendo aqui os vídeos. Vamos lá. Olha em japonês, que louco.
in Japanese, what Maria is saying roughly translates to corpse fishing isn't very admirable, or to rummage around in a corpse isn't very admirable. And this double entendre actually refers to the corpse at the end of the fishing hamlet here, and while both the English and the Japanese do imply this, the Japanese translation is way more overt about it by saying corpse fishing. This is just one of many examples of meaning lost in translation, because when the text and dialogue in Bloodborne was translated to English, certain changes would have been made by the localization team to make sure that the text was palatable to an English-speaking audience, and they've done a good job for the most part, but in a game like Bloodborne, even the slightest translation that's not literal can affect our interpretation.
Viu?
We
Isso que eu
found
quis
the
dizer,
best
só que ele
example
falou
of
mais
this
bonito
in
e
the
com uma
old
voz mais
hunter's bone
gostosa.
description. The bone of an old hunter whose name is lost. It is said that he
Isso
was
aqui é um exemplo de uma coisa que eu tava desconfiando, porque o pessoal já associava, o próprio Matias me falou, esse osso é da Maria. Aí eu ficava, pera, o osso é... Todo mundo dos antigos caçadores, que estão naquele pesadelo lá, naquela... Como é que fala? Que jogaram eu esqueci o nome. A maldição que jogaram neles lá pra viverem lá e tal. Todos eles esquivam dessa forma. Por que necessariamente da Maria? Na descrição do item nem tá escrito isso e tal. Aí,
an apprentice to old German and a practitioner of the art of quickening, which is a technique particular to the first hunters. What's weird is that in the Japanese description, there is no reference of this bone belonging to a man, so it could belong to a woman as well, and I can think of a more likely candidate, can't you? This bone lies upon the grave that transports us to the hunter's nightmare, which is a nightmare full of old hunters who possess this same art of quickening that the bone grants our hunter. So, sure, it could belong to any of the old hunters, man or woman, but it just makes so much more sense if this belongs to Maria. She's linked to this grave very heavily. She was an apprentice to German's workshop, she possesses the art of quickening, German had an affection for Maria, he even created the doll in her image. The doll prays at this grave, and it's the only grave to lie just outside German's abandoned workshop. So, after looking at the Japanese description, I feel very confident in saying that Maria is the most likely candidate for this grave. Assuming this is right, we can take this assumption further. This grave exists in the waking world, meaning that Maria must have died before German's hunter's dream began, and this fact helps us put together a timeline and tell a story. Perhaps laying Maria to rest here inspired German's meeting with the moon presence and his subsequent escape into a dream where he created something in Maria's image. And it doesn't even matter if this is speculation, because even if you don't agree, my point is that this is a line of speculation that we couldn't even go down because the English translation said the grave belonged to a man. And that's what this video is about. It's about
cara, olha o nível do roteiro desse maluco, velho. 3 minutos de vídeo aqui em que você já tá assim, ó, no vídeo, e foi só meio que... Foi a introdução do vídeo. Foi pra você entender o título do vídeo. Isso aí tudo. Foi pra você entender a introdução do vídeo. Que insano. E assim, entenderam por que eu fico nessa de, tipo, quando ele fala que é algo da opinião dele, fica claro que é a opinião dele ali, que é algo que você pode falar, ou realmente faz sentido, ou não faz sentido nenhum, mas fica claro naquilo ali, sabe? Não é algo que ele só, tipo, cuspi aqui.
Item descriptions to make sure we haven't missed anything important, or to make sure we haven't been interpreting something wrong this whole time. So, if you're like me and you care about documenting this stuff, then listen along.
Eu gosto.
And also, let's get some love for the guy that made this video possible. He goes by the name Lawmaster Nojar, and he's the one who hunted down the descriptions that I thought would most benefit us being translated. His initiative, his dedication, and his knowledge of the language is the basis of this video.
Tá vendo, rapaziada? Olha aí, ó. Tá vendo? Conhecimento da linguagem são a base desse vídeo. A dedicação do cara. Mano, tá vendo, velho? Você tem que aprender uma língua nova, bicho. Já chegou nesse momento já. Pô. Link tá no comentário fixado.
Let's do
English.
something cool for the guy and help him get his
Simba!
YouTube channel off the ground. He's got these plans to create a playthrough of Souls games focusing on translations and the lore, so
É
subscribe to him
interessante, hein?
if that sounds
Detonando
interesting.
e...
Alright, so back to the
focando na lore.
translations. This gender discrepancy with the old hunter's bone got me thinking, what if other English translations have misrepresented a gender? And I immediately thought of Alfred's dialogue, where he says this.
Once, a scholar betrayed his fellows at Bergenworth and brought forbidden blood back with him to Canehurst Castle. It was there that the first of the inhuman Vile Bloods was born. The Vile Bloods are fiendish creatures who threaten the purity of the Church's blood healing.
Lo and behold, it turns out that this betrayer isn't necessarily a he either. In Japanese, this betrayer is referred to with a gender-neutral expression,
Olha só.
which, obviously, again, opens him up to being a man or a woman. And who this betrayer is has always been a bit of a mystery. We don't even know if this betrayer is represented in-game. Before this video, most people thought that it was the Canehurst Crow who appears in the Grand Cathedral, since
Nossa,
he
esse
uses the
bicho
old
é
hunter's
grande boss do
bone, which
jogo.
links him to the workshop, and he also dons the Canehurst mask, which links him to Canehurst. So it's
Mais uma
possible
vez, como vocês podem ver, ele conta fato, 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 fato. Esses aqui são os fatos, minha opinião. Isso aqui é muito comum nos vídeos lá de fora. O Adonis, recentemente, quando a gente tava montando um PC novo aqui, que eu montei, quer dizer, que ele montou e ele veio aqui, né, eu ajudei e tal, mas que eu montei no sentido, tipo, de ser meu PC. Ele comentou isso, que, tipo, ele acompanha muito canal lá de fora, e ele me deu essa dica, tipo, cara, quando for fazer uma review de alguma coisa, fala o que é fato, o jogo tá assim, 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 sua opinião. Assim, 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 sua opinião. Fica muito melhor. Foi uma crítica legal que ele me deu.
he betrayed the Bergenworth scholars and took that forbidden blood to Canehurst to begin the Vile Blood line. But now that the betrayer position is opened up to the female cast of Bloodborne, the only candidate I can think of is Maria again, but I'm open to your ideas on this one since this is still speculation.
Yeah.
Maria is related to the Vile Blood Queen, so she has links to Canehurst, and she clearly has links to the Bergenworth scholars because she was an apprentice to German and she ended up in the Hunter's Nightmare. Plus, she resents what the Hunters did in the fishing hamlet, which could have inspired her to betray the Bergenworth scholars, but again, there is nothing explicitly linking her to stealing Canehurst's blood,
É disso que
so
eu tô falando.
what I'm saying is kind of a long shot. Anyway, again, my point is that
Tá
this
vendo,
long
mano? É
shot
disso que eu tô
wouldn't
falando, velho. É disso que eu tô falando. Bom, não
even
vou
be
ficar
possible
citando a mesma coisa, parando
unless
pra
we
falar a mesma coisa.
discovered this mistranslation. And it is worth pointing out that we don't know how much contact the English translation team had to clarify questions of gender like this, so bear that in mind. The betrayer is potentially referenced in the Japanese version of Lawrence and Willem's cutscene.
You think now to betray me?
In Japanese, the pronoun kimi and the particle mo can mean you also, so you also think to betray me. So we knew there was a split from Bergenworth, and now we learn that they may have split before Lawrence, not just after. What I also found interesting was these lines in Japanese, which say, "We are made human by the blood, we surpass humanity by the blood, we lose our humanity again by the blood." The notion of surpassing humanity by the blood is largely missing from the English quote. Furthermore, the adage of Bergenworth says, "We urge you to fear the blood as you proceed," where the English simply says, "to fear the blood." Speaking of fear, the Harrods set explains a little bit more about why the general populace
Repete alguma coisa naquele meio
and
segundo que eu parei de olhar ali pra
Harrodpish
mudar.
simply says to fear the blood. Speaking of fear, the Harrods set explains a little bit more about why the general populace fear and hate the hunters. In Japanese, the Harrod set is actually the disguise set worn by hunters whose job it is to blend in with the populace and who have the power to act and kill anyone they suspect of being a beast. The English line, "These hunters are keen to early signs of the scourge, serving as the first line of defense against its outbreak," becomes, They were disguised and precautionary hunters. They didn't overlook signs of beasthood. The next line, or perhaps when the time is right, they find signs of the scourge where there are none, becomes, or they see it necessarily where they believe it is so. The final line, it just goes to show the corner beggar is not always who he seems, becomes, all people have some sort of secrets. And the implication here is that these hunters had the church-pardoned right to kill wherever they see fit, to investigate whomever they want. The English posits them as the first line of defense against the outbreak, hunters who sometimes see beasthood where it doesn't exist, but the Japanese suggests that these hunters act with impunity, uncovering the secrets of the populace all under the pretense of beast hunting, and it does a lot to explain the paranoia of the populace, their fear of the church and hatred of the hunters. Another armor set title that wasn't replicated perfectly is the Tomb Prospector
Vocês
set.
entenderam essa parte? Então, é como se fosse meio que um sistema de, não corrupção, mas abuso de poder, lembrei. É como se fosse um abuso de poder mesmo. Se eles podiam matar à vontade, que rolava nenhuma punição, logo eles podiam, bom, aquele cara ali tá se transformando, olha só, que pena, matei.
In Japanese, this name is actually a combination of the word tomb and a thing that is rough or violent, or a thing that breaks open. Noja tells us that a direct translation would be tomb break opener, contrasting with tomb prospector, which sounds really gentle and scholarly by comparison. We know from the way that the scholars treated the fishing hamlet that the scholars weren't particularly gentle with this ancient race of alien beings, and the tomb prospectors were no exception. In fact, they're downright rude in their naming of some great ones. Rom, the vacuous spider, is actually Rom, the stupid spider. The word hakuchi means stupid or idiotic, and Noja says that these are the words you use when you call someone a retard or something. It carries that same social weight. I feel sorry for Rom now, damn. Rom is referenced by a few notes as somehow hiding rituals. When we kill him, in fact, Mensis and their ritual are revealed to us, and we can enter their nightmare and, supposedly, interrupt it. Since Rom is within a great lake, it reminded me of the arcane lake rune. Here's its description. Great volumes of water serve as a bulwark guarding sleep. The Japanese clarifies that guarding sleep means preventing the sleep from being interrupted, which I found fitting because great bodies of water do prevent nightmares from being interrupted. Killing Rom in his giant lake allows us to interrupt the Mensis ritual, for example. The great body of water over the nightmare of Yharnam also guards the source of the nightmare in the fishing hamlet, preventing us from interrupting it. And speaking of Rom, did you ever notice that his corpse, or a corpse of a being like him, makes up the altar in front of Ebrietas? This is named the Altar of Despair in English, but in Japanese it's actually the Altar of Grief, or Altar of Lamentations. And from the way Ebrietas is positioned when we first enter, not even aggroing until you hit her, we can surmise that this is an altar for her grief and her lamentations, which in my mind sounds a little bit more personal than the altar of despair. I assume she's despairing because Rom, or this creature, has ascended without her, since she is referenced as the left behind Great One. And of all the information we do
ela
need,
seria a última antes... Peraí, além das informações que temos, precisamos... Então, ela seria a última que não despertou? Que não acendeu, né? Porque ela achava que o Ron tinha morrido? Seria isso? Ou depois que o... mas tá vendo como é que é legal? Quando eu perguntei aquilo da Liz Matias, ele falou algumas coisas estão aí só por tá, né? Mas daí acabaram de explicar um negócio que o Matias não sabia. Olha lá, te peguei, Matias. Sei mais que tu.
Brincadeira, on the nature of the great ones.
Nunca foi uma competição.
And for that, we should look a little bit closer at the umbilical cords. It's very likely that these cords are needed to meet with the great ones. Worth noting is that Mensis' chord says it granted them audience with Murgo in English, but in Japanese it clarifies that it didn't grant them an audience, rather it's described as granting them a chance meeting. Similarly, a note in the lecture building says that in English, the nameless moon presence was beckoned by Lawrence and his associates, but in Japanese there is no mention of beckoning, and it simply says Lawrence and Company's moon monster. And finally,
Olha só,
the
mano,
Lower
os
Laran
localizadores pra inglês inventando história que não tem, mano.
chalice description. The English says, there are trace remains of medical procedures in parts of Ailing and Loran. Whether these were attempts to control the scourge of the beast is unknown. There is a significant deviation here in Japanese. The Japanese says, were these procedures countering the beast's sickness or priming/causing them? The expression used for priming means literally to begin a flow of liquid through a pump. To me, it sounds almost as if the Tumerians' medical procedures mirrored the populace of Yharnam's, as they might have also discovered blood transfusion. The Japanese questions whether they were trying to control the plague outbreak with medicine or causing it with medicine, like is done in Yharnam. So yeah, interesting stuff. To finish up, let's rapid fire a few translations because they're really short and I don't need to go into too much depth. First, the One Reborn translates to the Ones Reborn. Normally, Japanese doesn't pluralize, but the word to describe them means to revive/reform/reorganize a group or institution that was defunct. Blood echoes are translated to being dying wishes of the blood, which reminds me of the Air rune, which posits that the Air is a hunter who bears the echoing will of those before him. Furthermore, insight is actually enlightenment. Frenzy is actually insanity. Blood tinge is actually blood quality. In the Fishing Hamlet, the wizened child is literally translated to the infant grown old. Maria's weapon, the Rakuyo, is named Fallen Leaf and is referred to in the game as a fairly famous blade. Next, the doll knows that the moon presence is in the dream. In her dialogue where she says, "O Flora of the moon of the dream," it's clearer in Japanese that Flora is the name of the moon presence. It's curious that she knew it existed all along. When Mikolash dies, in English she says,
Now I'm waking up! I'll forget everything!
but in Japanese, he's asking a question. He's questioning whether he'll wake up and remember anything. In Japanese, the celestial dial description has a double meaning. It says it will leak a secret to the user, which is another reference to the watery secret behind the clock. In the corruption rune, we learn that what Alfred calls vile bloods don't refer to themselves as vile bloods. Instead, they refer to themselves as the blood kin of Canehurst. The same term is used in Annalise's lines, making it clear that vile blood is a slur preferred by their Bergenworth rivals. Runesmith Carol is described with more humble language in Japanese. He's called Copyist Carol. His transcription of Beast in English says it is one of the first runes and one of the first to be forbidden, but in Japanese it is said that it's the first rune to be created and the first rune to be forbidden. No exceptions. And finally, we start at the beginning of the game. Remember that note that was left on the chair after your blood transfusion? Seek pale blood to transcend the hunt. In Japanese, it's actually seek pale blood to complete the hunt. And the Japanese reveals that you were the one that wrote this. It wasn't left for you by the man who did your transfusion, it was left there for you by you. And thanks for watching, guys. I'm glad we could get a little bit more information out there.
Tá vendo que delícia, cara? O cara só solta e vai embora. Solta uma dessa daí e vai embora. Meu Deus, foi a gente que colocou ali. Nossa, isso daí abre imagem pra gente pensar muita coisa, velho. Uou, que da hora. Que da hora. Já perdi a linha completamente, já não sei mais o que vai aparecer no vídeo e o que não vai, mas agora eu quero ver o Bloodborne DLC do Vidia, não sei pronunciar, 50 insights interessantes. Se eu colocar no vídeo é porque vai ser interessante isso aqui, senão vocês nem vão estar vendo essa minha gravação, igual todas as outras que eu gravei e não estão no vídeo. Então, vamos lá. Essa daqui eu sei que já tem a DLC, porque logo no início aqui, ó. Tá aqui já, ó. Maria logo na thumb. Na thumb não, né? No primeiro segundo. Então vamos nessa. Ah, eu também já reagi ao Sandman, tá? Que vocês falaram bastante pra eu reagir a ele. É um vídeo interessante. Peraí que meu olho tá coçando. Só que pra gente que fez a série, quase tudo que o Matias passou pra gente é o que o Sandman já fala. Então, não tinha muita novidade pra mim. Já os vídeos aqui do VAT já tem a forma de contar é um pouco diferente e eu acabo gostando mais. Porque o Sandman parece que ele acaba mastigando bastante pra gente. E isso faz com que eu fique com algumas desconfianças sobre algumas coisas. Porque uma coisa... uma forma que esse pessoal, tipo, pelo menos o VAT faz muito assim, é que ele joga fato, baseado em itens, sem a opinião dele, apenas fato. E em seguida ele fala a opinião dele, ou então dá uma interpretação dele. E daí você o junta na sua cabeça. Já o Sandman, ele te entrega de uma forma que não dá pra saber o que é a interpretação dele ou o que ele realmente tirou de algum item, de alguma história do jogo ali. Então, claro, se eu fosse na descrição do vídeo, ele fala que deixa o documento lá pra gente ler. Eu não fiz isso, porque, bom, tô com preguiça. Então, né, eu prefiro ver esses vídeos aqui.
Let's go over a bunch of the more curious parts of the old hunters.
Ah, mas só pra deixar claro, o vídeo do Sandman é incrível, tá? Inclusive, pra quem não gosta de ficar lendo legenda e tal, pode dar ele lá. Só que como ele fala bastante coisa de NPC e tal, de quests que a gente já fez, acaba que sendo um vídeo muito longo pro que a gente não tem tanta coisa assim, né, de novidade. Eu vi e reagi, só que daí eu provavelmente não vou colocar no vídeo por causa disso, tá? Mas é muito bom. Inclusive, no vídeo de Silent Hill 2, eu reagi assim que a gente terminou a série ao vídeo do Sandman. Ele é muito bom, mano, recomendo.
Some of these insights are pretty significant, and some are just minor observations, but fact is, there's roughly 50 insights in this video, so make sure you keep...
Ó, o Matias fez a gente não ver essa transformação aqui na série, porque ele mandou eu matar a tia antes da hora, velho. Nossa, eu puxei muito o fio do fone aqui agora com a garrafinha. Au!
Keep an eye on that frenzy meter, yeah? Let's start with the
Fique de olho no medidor de frenzy.
Fact is, there's roughly 50 insights in this video, so make sure you keep an eye on that frenzy meter, yeah?
A gente vai
Let's
ficar
start
maluco.
with the eye of a blood-drunk hunter. In the same way that the tonsil stone allows one amygdala to transport us to the nightmare frontier, the eye allows another amygdala to transport us to the hunter's nightmare. I thought it was interesting to discover that the amygdala needs something related to the corresponding nightmare realm to transport us there. Next, the grave that
De certa
connects
forma, a gente é um dos únicos, na verdade, o único caçador que vai pra esse pesadelo sem ter se intoxicado com sangue. Porque todos os outros caçadores foram pra lá por ter se intoxicado com sangue. Inclusive, agora que eu já tô com bastante informação na minha cabeça, eu já tô entendendo muito mais as coisas, logo eu começo a explicar aqui. Porque tá sendo uma grande obsessão pra mim isso daqui, velho. Então, assim, eu tô há mais ou menos 3 horas aqui já, vendo vídeos. Muitos vídeos. Oh my...
The hunter's dream to the hunter's nightmare is also the grave we find the old hunter's bone at in the waking world. The old hunter's bone allows our hunter to learn the lost art of quickening.
Inclusive vai ter um vídeo aqui que eu reagi, mas eu acho que vou mostrar de novo ele. Porque eu já tava naquele modo já de só olhar e assistir assim, tá ligado? Então eu acho que eu vou rever ele aqui, que vai falar mais sobre esse osso do caçador aí que ele tá mencionando agora.
Which was a technique particular to the first hunters, and indeed many hunters like Maria dash like this in the hunter's nightmare without use of the bone. Third, there's a deceased amygdala in the nightmare, and as we discover this new realm, we learn that nightmare realms are almost certainly linked to one another. They all have amygdala, they all have winter lanterns, which are based off the doll in our dream.
Ó, isso aqui que é legal. Isso aqui ele fala em outro vídeo até, e é bom eu complementar aqui. Ele fala que elas são baseadas nas bonecas, e pode soar estranho, mas se vocês olharem pro design dela e a boneca do sonho, a boneca do German, que é baseada na Maria, são idênticas. Cara, é idêntica. Isso aqui da roupinha é idêntico. A parte aqui do... É porque eu não sei o nome dessas roupas, que faz essa cintura que é idêntico, a mãozinha é idêntica, só muda que tem um cabeção muito louco, cheio de olho. E tá toda ensanguentada também. Daí tem um outro vídeo que ele fala sobre isso daí, ele coloca a comparação das duas, assim. E realmente ela parece ser baseada. E tem... Claro, aqui eu não vou conseguir colocar tudo, né? Mas se vocês quiserem ir por conta própria, vão ver várias curiosidades desse tipo lá. Que tem uma explicaçãozinha do porquê que elas são parecidas com as bonecas.
Based off the doll in our dream, the ship masts in the fishing hamlet can be seen from the nightmare frontier.
Caraca, dessa eu não sabia.
Even the washed-up corpse of Kos looks kind of similar to these things in the nightmare frontier. We're learning more and more about these nightmare realms, especially how they have a very real ability to shape events in the waking world. Next up, have you noticed that the old hunters all wear a garb with the same red cloth on the inside? Maria, German, their attire is consistent with the time that they're from, which I thought was a nice, subtle design touch. The description of the old hunter's gear also tells us that the people in this time were quite superstitious. For instance, they used to think that the beast blood crept up the right leg, hence they put a belt around the right trouser leg. As pointed out by a bunch of you in the first video, this might explain why German has a peg leg on his right. Some of you suggested that it might have been amputated in some outdated method of prevention. And
Isso é teoria, mas é muito interessante ver que, de fato, eles acreditavam que subia pela perna direita, por isso colocavam um cinto. Vocês viram ali o cinto na calça, ó? Tinha um cinto aqui, ó, na perna direita. Daí o German não tem uma perna direita, talvez em alguma forma antiquada de prevenção, ou seja, que não era de fato isso que acontecia, mas a gente vai ter que amputar, porque senão você vai se transformar. Ele falou e cortou, uma forma que a gente sabe que não funciona, ou talvez funcione, não sei. Ponto é, quase todos os caçadores são destros, a gente vê eles usando sempre a arma na mão direita, e daí que, quando eles usam vida, eles sempre guardam a arma rapidinho e enfiam a seringa na perna direita. Então talvez tenha algum fundamento aí. Essa superstição, vai ver, eles não reparavam que eles só furavam a perna direita.
Belt around the right trouser leg. As pointed out by a bunch of you in the first video, this might explain why German has a peg leg on his right. Some of you suggested that it might have been amputated in some outdated method of prevention. And German and his peg leg both...
Ponto interessante sobre esse vídeo, hein? Um cara revelou no Reddit, um cara comentou no vídeo dele, falando do comentário do Reddit, e faz muito sentido que o German, na verdade, não perdeu em uma luta contra alguma besta, ou não perdeu a perna por tentar se manter fora do flagelo das feras, não ser intoxicado pelo sangue e tal. E sim, na verdade, quando ele tem... quando a presença da lua desce, ela te agarra ali, e foi assim que ele perdeu a perna, porque quando a gente não tem ainda capacidade de lutar contra a presença da lua, e a gente faz esse final de enfrentar o German e ganha dele, a gente também fica de cadeira de roda com uma madeira na perna. Quer dizer, não sei com a madeira na perna, mas a gente fica também de cadeira de roda. Então meio que é uma forma de... Não sei porquê, né? Tem que cortar pra ela, arranca sua perna pra você virar o dono do sonho.
Both are viewable in the trailer for the Old Hunters. Have a look here. You can just see his peg leg, which is curious because it doesn't just make it any old hunter wearing German's garb, it's German himself walking through the fishing hamlet here. It places German's character undeniably within the events that the Old Hunters depicts, and we'll go into a bit more depth on that later. For now though, look at the bloodlickers you come across in the Blood River. I used to think that bloodlickers were limited to Canehurst, as if there was some sort of strain of the old blood that created them, because they're so different to other beasts, but because they're here, it makes it more likely that bloodlickers just appear where a lot of blood has to be present. The bloodlickers in Canehurst, for example, they likely appeared when the big slaughter took place there, where the executioners wiped out all of the vile bloods and slaughtered them. These bloodlickers would have fed on the corpses, but, you know, years have passed since then, so all the bloodlickers there are skinny and roaming for food when we encounter them, but the ones here in the nightmare in the Blood River are fat and bloated.
Cara, foi o que o Matias falou. O Matias, quando a gente tava jogando com ele, ele até se questionou quando a gente chegou no Old Hunters, né, da DLC, ele ficou, ué, mas esse daí eles não estão inchados? Se eles estão inchados, eles não deviam te atacar, um negócio assim. Caramba,
Old Hunters,
mano.
there is a heavy concentration of items
Agora faz sentido lá tá lotado de sangue, né?
related to the powder kegs, the Gatling gun, the piercing rifle, the boom hammer. All of these are weapons that the Old Hunters use, and all of it is going to help a lot when we're putting together a timeline for the things that we see in this nightmare. Take Lawrence, for example. The fact that he appears in the nightmare on fire might be because this is how he died. Maybe he died to the Molotovs of the powder kegs, maybe in the purge of Old Yharnam, perhaps. Just speculation, of course. The Gatling gun hunter
Deixando
who
claro
we
que é
find in the
especulação.
cave is described by his weapon as being the youngest of Jura's 3 companions, and he's wielding a portable version of the Gatling gun that Jura
Caraca,
operates in Old
o
Yharnam.
Jura, pessoal, é aquele cara lá que fica com a Gatling Gun bem grande lá em cima, atirando na gente. E ele, na verdade, ele defende as feras que estão ali embaixo. Ele não quer que caçadores cheguem lá e matem eles porque ele tem uma certa empatia pelas feras. Porque, bom, se tem pessoas, eles são pessoas, mesmo não é pra matar eles de qualquer jeito, entendeu? Então, de certa forma, ele meio que protege, junto com os outros 2 parceiros dele, se eu não me engano são 2. Um deles fica lá embaixo e o outro eu não lembro onde é que tá. Eu acho que é esse daí, que tá já nessa área do pesadelo dos caçadores. E, bom, se você dá a volta e vai por trás dele, ele conversa contigo. Eu vi recentemente a conversa dos 2, e ele deixando claro que, tipo, não é pra mexer com aquelas feras. Como você chegou por trás, você não feriu nenhuma delas, você faz um outro caminho ali, que o Matias até tentou me passar na série, só que eu não consegui fazer. A gente não conseguiu lembrar como é que fazia pra dar a volta por trás. Mas eu vi no vídeo, é bem legal a conversa.
Given his relationship to Jura, I find it really curious that he too seems to be protecting the beasts. Why else would he be standing at the entrance to the dead-end cave with his back turned to
Caraca, verdade.
4 or 5?
Tem 5 bestas lá dentro, 5, 6 bichos muito sinistros. Um deles é até um boss, que é aquele que curte sangue lá, que eu esqueci o nome. E ele tá de fato meio que protegendo a
Deadly
área.
beasts hiding in the cave behind him. And we see this behavior in the
Aí, ó,
Sorcerer
esse daí é o outro
Hunter
parceiro
of
dele,
Old
ó.
Yharnam as well, who I feel pretty comfortable now calling one of Jura's companions. When you reach Simon outside the first shortcut, you can actually
eu acho que ele
just
vai
kill
contar
him
isso agora.
here
Não.
if you want his bow
Ele vai contar sobre o Simon, verdade. Deixa eu falar.
blade weapon as soon as possible. And don't worry about the key he gives you later, it will appear in the spot that he usually gives it to you. Another NPC I should mention is Valta. If you crush 5 vermin and reload the area to acquire his helmet, his name and appearance will change to reflect that when you summon him. He becomes a helmetless
Caraca, o cara é
Valta,
bonitão,
the
olha lá.
Beast Eater. His duties, apparently, have been passed down to
Talvez
you.
eu tenha falado cedo
In
demais.
addition, your league stance also changes to have you place your hand in front of your heart. Before we
Que legal.
start talking about Ludwig, do you remember this snail girl that fell from the sky? I'm
Esse
sure
daí
a
o
lot
Matias
of you
falou pra
put
gente.
together that she fell from the above water world above our heads that's not able to be seen from this perspective, and I even got a shot of her falling from a distance just to make sure that's where she's coming from. Someone pointed me to this video recorded by Reddit user Dr. Xanthine MD, who discovered that you can actually revive the snail girl using the Madara's whistle on her corpse. It must activate a part of the hitbox that's untouchable
Como
or
assim?
something,
Não faz o menor
because you
sentido.
can't damage her otherwise. Now, onto Ludwig. How many of you had
Ó o
this
bicho que
little
o
blood
Matias falou pra
corpse
deixar vivo.
survive the fight? It's surprisingly difficult to keep him alive, and altogether pointless, really. He just chuckles to himself once the fight is over. And if you look closely at Ludwig, you do realize a few things. He has eyes on the inside of his little growth here, and he's also wearing what looks to be the executioner's garb, and his moonlight greatsword is strapped to his back during Phase 1. It's really cool to see that he retains a bit of his humanity when he lays eyes upon it. If you leave Ludwig's head alive after talking to it and reload your game, you'll reappear to find that Simon put Ludwig out of his misery instead. There's an arrow through his eye. A couple of you guys in the first video pointed this out to me, and I thought it was really cool. But it was only after I watched a German spy's playthrough that I figured out how to get the most dialogue out of these characters, and you know that's interesting information for me since I need to record this dialogue.
Caraca, o dano que tá dando.
You should check
Meu
out
Deus,
the German spy's
7.000.
playthrough, by the way. He's got like one of the most knowledgeable playthroughs of the DLC out there, and he uses some pretty overpowered techniques. Moving on past Ludwig, did you know that if you die outside the bell ringer's room, then he'll say this?
Unending death awaits those who pry into the unknown.
Up ahead, in the main cathedral chamber, we discover that the all-popular How to Pick Up Fair Maidens has been ordered in bulk by the folks in
Como
the Nightmare.
assim?
Must have been recommended by German or something. One of these fair maidens here is dressed in white and recites the same phrases that Vicar Amelia did. Logically, this is Amelia, and logically she entered the nightmare after we killed her. She
Mas
prays
não era pra ela ter vindo na mesma forma que ela morreu? Era pra ela estar como monstrão, não?
in a different location now, but she's still potentially praying at Lawrence's skull. Sends the elevator up without you on it.
É legal porque ela tá fazendo a mesma coisa no pesadelo, né? Ela tá no mesmo lugar, rezando no crânio do Lawrence, só que na verdade o crânio do Lawrence tá só embaixo. Tu sobes daí e ele tá
Go
logo embaixo.
underneath, and you'll find Lawrence's human skull and the church cannon. One of the coolest little details on the elevator is the surgery altar itself. Putting aside all of the symbolism involved when we insert eyes into the inside of the skull and ascend into the heavens, how many of you actually noticed that there is a beast underneath the table?
Caraca,
I
tem
caught
mesmo.
onto this when I read a tweet by Hellkite Drake, another uploader who you should check out. The beast under the table reminded him of the beast in the opening cutscene of Bloodborne when you get the blood transfusion, and I gotta agree, the whole scene here symbolizes to me that latent beasthood is always a threat lying in wait, but it's also something that the church awakened through their experiments. Worth noting also is the book, the bell,
Poético.
and this hat mask thing that looks curiously like Willem's.
Eu até achava que era
Moving
o
up to the
Willan.
research hall, let's take a look at these statues. It's getting to the point now where we can sort of notice these trends in Bloodborne's architecture, and I'm starting to see these hunched over shapes everywhere. These things in the fishing village, the fish men in the village, the alien statues in the cathedral. They really like this shape in Bloodborne. When we finally finish Adeline's questline, she shares the milkweed rune with us. On the Fextra Life wiki, someone has written that the inscription of the rune resembles the letters HP, which could be a reference to H.P. Lovecraft, whose work is clearly an inspiration
Como
for
assim não é Harry
Bloodborne.
Potter?
In fact, the story of the fishing hamlet is incredibly similar to Lovecraft's horror novel The Shadow over Innsmouth, which a lot of people have pointed out to me in the third video's comment section. The plot details a secretive town, humanoid fish men, and the notion of human sacrifice, so pretty similar. But speaking of great bodies of water in the fishing village, as pointed out by commenter Iskaral1, the word loch from Lochshield means lake in Irish or Gaelic. And, of course, this is all behind the giant clock tower that Maria guards. In an earlier video, we pointed out that the hands align to point to the Great Lake rune, but what about the other runes here? Well, there are a bunch of them, and some are missing, most are there, but there is one here that I don't recognize. It's this massive squiggles, and there's not another rune in the game like this, right? The closest thing I can find are the clockwise runes, but even they don't have these shapes. And it's weird because FromSoft had a bunch of runes they could have used here. They didn't use all of them, so why put one here that doesn't exist in-game? It's just making me curious, thinking like, there's something we haven't found yet. And I should take this...
Lembrando que esse vídeo aqui foi feito bem próximo ali do lançamento da DLC, então sempre fica ainda aquela coisa de falta de descobrir coisa ainda, hein? Tem alguma coisa escondida. Nesses jogos, mano, é tanta coisa escondida, é tanta coisa que dá pra assimilar, tanto detalhezinho que é relevante e foi pensado pra estar ali e que a gente demora pra pegar. É incrível isso, é incrível. Principalmente depois de eu consumir tanto conteúdo disso, eu já tô até um pouco meio tipo, uou, me dá um tempinho pra eu pensar. Por favor.
Moment to point out that no one has found the level 3 guidance rune yet. The official DLC guide does tell us that it exists within the depth 5 route chalice dungeons, so if you're one of the rare people who enjoy doing the chalice dungeons, then get out there and find that rune. Let's move on to Maria. She's a really interesting character with curious motivations and a fascinating background.
Só queria dizer mesmo que depois que a gente zerou o jogo, eu recomecei mais uma vez no NG Plus, e daí eu acabei de zerar de novo ele, tipo, ontem, porque foi bem rápido. E daí que eu fui enfrentar a Maria, e eu consegui enfrentar ela e matar ela tão rápido a ponto de não ter usado um negocinho de sangue. Ela não me deu um hit. Eu matei ela super rápido. E quando eu cheguei no COS, foi de primeira também. Só isso mesmo.
The Rakuyo weapon she uses lists her as a distant relative to the Queen of Canehurst, and even the Evelyn pistol she uses is a pistol favoured by the Canehurst Knights. The rakuyo we find in the well was her weapon that she allegedly threw away when she could stomach it no longer.
Ah!
It's a simple weapon.
Meu Deus, eu tô aqui ouvindo o negócio e eu esqueci que tava sem legenda. E eu tô boiando. Nessa parte, por algum motivo, acaba a legenda e daí eu vou colocar aqui pra inglês gerado automaticamente. E traduzir automaticamente aqui pro português. Agora vai. Pronto, agora sim,
Get
vamos lá.
out there and find that rune. Let's move on to Maria. She's a really interesting character with curious motivations and a fascinating background. The rakuyo weapon she uses lists her as a distant relative to the Queen of Canehurst, and even the Evelyn pistol she uses is a pistol favoured by the Canehurst Knights. The rakuyo we find in the well was her weapon that she allegedly threw away when she could stomach it no longer. It's a simple weapon, it's not a blood blade like the chikage, but we do know that Maria gave into her thirst for blood, since she certainly fights with blood in the boss fight, and even the goblet beside her looks as if it had blood within it. There's also a picture beside her, but the glass is so shattered that it's almost impossible to make out what it is. There are a lot of other cool details with her. For example, the way she lets go of your hand here reminds me of the way you hold your hand up to the doll to level up. Only an honest death will cure you now, she says, and I take this to mean that only truly breaking your spirit in a fight against her will stop the hunter coming back. She also says, a corpse should be left well enough alone, which mightn't just be related to her, it could be in reference to the corpse of Koz at the end of the fishing hamlet. She is clearly aiming to protect this corpse, and must have had a huge amount of distaste for what the hunters did here, and for all the hunters coming through. Remember that grave that overlooks the corpse of Koz on the cliffside? The one with the lumen flower placed upon it. I'm almost certain that Maria placed this grave and flowers here because she's done the same thing within the astral clock tower room for this coffin here, and also because the balcony key tells us that Maria hoped Adeline would find comfort in the faint breeze that carried the scent of flowers from the outside. So her use of flowers here is pretty well referenced. There's also this fairly rare thing that happened to me when I was practicing for the boss guide. Maria can stagger and riposte you if you get hit by this specific double-bladed attack. It almost looks like she's holding you close and whispering something in your ear before she rips her fist out of your chest. When you do defeat Maria, take a look at her death animation. Twitter user Halman made the observation that it looks almost identical to German's. Both characters reach towards the heavens before falling forward. After you kill Maria, you will also get this dialogue from the doll.
Good hunter, this may sound strange, but have I somehow changed? Moments ago, from some place, perhaps deep within, I sensed a liberation from heavy shackles. Not that I would know. How passing strange.
You can actually listen to all of the dialogues from the game on Moonlight Butterfly's channel.
Viram que legal? Nossa, eu não sei se vai ter algum outro vídeo que a gente vai mencionar mais sobre isso, só que é muito legal esse tipo de coisa. Eu acho que vai sim. Vai ter mais um vídeo que a gente vai ver daqui a pouquinho que vai falar mais sobre isso.
Which will be in the description. There's a million things
Ela
worth
sentiu quando
mentioning as soon as we enter the
Maria
fishing hamlet. Most of these things, I found, revolve around the villager who walks towards you initially. He has the same models as most of the spellcasters in the village, and there's a lot of curious things to note about him. Firstly, you can't actually kill him, even when he appears to have no health left. All you can do is knock him down and feel bad about yourself as he struggles to pick himself up. Of course, not to be deterred, I promptly beast-roared him off a cliff. No, never mind, he's still walking around down there, if you look closely. Moving on, he also reacts when you knock over the small pile of shells near him, which is interesting, and one of the oddest things I've found is that if you watch him all the way until one of the last piles of shells, then he'll actually start to cast a lightning spell as he steps over the shells. I don't know if this is a pathing error or something. It's weird. This could even be related to how some of the other lightning spellcasters seem to be casting lightning upon the other larger versions of these shells when you sneak up on them. Why they're casting lightning upon shells, I have no idea. Let me know in the comments below if you have.
Legal.
If you talk to him with the milkweed rune equipped, then he gives a ton more
Bateria tá
dialogue,
acabando,
and
hein?
he also gives you an arcane spell, as I've mentioned in another
é
video.
assim que tu pega aquele crânio cheio de buraco, que são os olhos, né? Que ficaram na cabeça das pessoas.
Also gives you an arcane spell, as then he gives a ton more
Uma
dialogue,
serralha equipada.
and he also
E daí ele
gives
te
you
dá
an
muito mais diálogo.
arcane
E ele te dá
spell,
esse
as I've
item.
mentioned in another video. Also, by the way, did you
Depois eu
know
vou
that
querer pegar
this
esse item.
cauliflower head glows in the dark? When you kill the orphan in the ending cutscene, you hear this chant, which is likely spoken by the male villager at the start. But this dialogue and the chanting in general, it isn't that unique. After you kill the orphan and the rain goes away, you can hear the chants
Nossa, a
of
parte
the
é muito
voices
sinistra.
in the huts more clearly. Here's what I think they're saying. Mother is dead, her baby taken. Of all the dialogue I strained my ears to hear, I feel like this is the most significant. The notion that the orphan of Kos was taken from the corpse.
Órfão de Kos aqui, tá? É errinho da legenda porque tá no automático do YouTube, mas dá pra entender, só fazer uma forcinha.
Is novel information in and of itself, and it follows that the hunters had something to gain from stealing the orphan. 3/3 of an umbilical cord, perhaps? I do have to do some more thinking on this, so we'll get back to it in another video, but at the very least, it explains why the villager at the start pleads for mercy upon the poor wizened child. It's because the child was taken. I would really love it if you guys went there and strained your ears to hear some of this stuff. I might be wrong, and you might discover something new for everybody to talk about, you know? 'Cause who knows what else is hidden in this dialogue. You can hear their voices very clearly near the beheaded hanging man, which is the symbol of the hunters, and also the shape of a man whose blood has gone to his head, which seems pretty appropriate for the curse that was laid upon the hunters, if you ask me. I mean, they turn into beasts when the blood goes to their head, so... I wonder if the villagers themselves serve as inspiration for the alien-like statues in the Grand Cathedral. I always thought it was weird that the statues wielded these long harpoon-like spears, which are pretty much unique weapons to those in the fishing village. But not all of the fishmen in this village are wielding
Nível de
harpoons,
observação,
though.
né?
Many have scraping tools that they use to dig through the mud, which explains the piles of these little orbs that I assume are eggs, and also the piles of the little shells which are like little versions of the big shells that the snail girls crawl out of. Furthermore, you'd be wrong to assume that these light blue things are fish. They're quite clearly slug-like creatures when you look at them closely, and they're
Parece
caught
até
in
mini
nets,
eminentes.
they're on the ground, they're in barrels, and most interestingly, I also found a slug being used as a candle here, which
Caraca, um deles
implies
sendo
that
usado
they're
como vela,
flammable to
mano.
an extent, and maybe that they can be used as fuel. I suppose that explains the flammable barrels around the area as well. Some
Faz
of the
sentido
stuff
porque
you can
agora tudo
find
explode
by
nesse lugar.
looking in depth at these things is pretty insane. Progressing a little further, I want to point out a tip that was suggested by many people in the third playthrough video. It's that, finally, there is a use for the shaman's bone blade. If you're having trouble getting the Rakuyo, this is probably the way to do it.
Tem como colocar um pra lutar com o outro.
And finally, we get to the orphan. Many people have pointed me towards a video
Sério,
by...
uma das histórias mais legais que eu tô mais curioso até o momento é sobre o órfão, porque tem muita coisa legal.
Aegon of Astora, who compared the cry of the orphan to the cry of German, and discovered that they are the same sound file,
Olha
albeit
isso, mano.
slightly altered. Aegon has a bunch of great cinematic lore videos as well, so you should check them out in the description. But back to the orphan being related to German, there is a link here, for sure. For one, he's wielding a weapon that has the same sort of shape as German's scythe, and also, when you kill the orphan, the doll gives you this dialogue, undeniably linking German to the orphan somehow.
Oh, good hunter. I can hear German sleeping. On any other night, he'd be restless. But on this night, he sounds so very calm. Perhaps something has eased his suffering.
Oh, and one more thing. It's probably the most amazing thing that I've ever discovered.
Que susto, velho. Essa finalização de vídeo aí, genial. A gente morreu de frenesi. Cara, que loucura. Então, pera, o German?
The orphan, the doll gives you this dialogue, undeniably linking German to the orphan somehow.
Oh, good.
Ou seja, quando você mata o Cos, o órfão de Cos, o German fica mais tranquilo. E ele tem o mesmo choro.
For one, he's wielding a weapon that
loucura.
has the same sort of shape as German's scythe, and
A arma
also,
é parecida com a do German,
when you
verdade.
kill the orphan, the doll gives you this dialogue,
Quer dizer, parecido é um jeito forte de falar, né?
undeniably linking German to the orphan somehow.
Oh, good hunter.
Cara, mas por que ele teria ligação com o órfão? Tipo, é esse tipo de coisa que buga um pouco em relação às interpretações, porque a boneca tem ligação com a Maria de alguma forma, por conta do sonho que ela meio que vive no sonho do German. Só uma lembrança do que já foi a Maria, por ele sentir muita falta dela e tudo mais, né? E a gente vai ver daqui a pouquinho mais um vídeo sobre, que vai falar mais sobre isso. Daí, quando você mata a Maria, tem uma fala da boneca sobre isso. Quando você mata o Cos, que tem um choro idêntico ao German, que depois que você mata ele, tem uma fala para o German. Isso é muito doido, mano. Nesse mesmo vídeo, eu achei uns comentários muito interessantes sobre isso aqui, que eu queria passar pra vocês. Vamos só traduzir aqui. E... tarará. Sim, conforme mostrado no trailer, German estava lá durante a pilhagem, que seria quando eles foram lá na área dos pescadores. Selecionados por Lawrence, German e Maria foram enviados para lá para verificar os rumores das pessoas que encontraram e adoraram um grande, ele fala, só que é um eminente, né? Maria foi quem rasgou os crânios dos aldeões para verificar os olhos, louco por discernimento, né? Aqueles discernimento de louco? Pois é. Que é aquele item. Daí tem aquela cabeça que o cara dá pra você, que é uma cabeça cheia de buracos pra pegar os olhos ali, pra ver os olhos. Esses buracos são onde ficavam os olhos, pelo que eu entendi. E German massacrou o órfão, louco por sangue. O Pesadelo dos Caçadores foi um passeio pela história onde você reencenou o que aconteceu, que começou essa bagunça. German e Maria enlouquecendo foi o que começou tudo, fazendo com que os aldeões os amaldiçoassem e... possivelmente apenas coincidência, a presença da lua respondeu e os prendeu em um pesadelo perpétuo que nunca termina, também conhecido como The Hunter's Curse, como é que é? A Maldição dos Caçadores. A história de Bloodborne é você se libertando da maldição ao ingerir os cordões umbilicais para resistir à influência do Great One, do Eminente, e enfrentar o marionetista dessa charada sem fim, a presença da lua. Matá-lo não apenas o liberta, mas também fornece conhecimento e ecos de sangue suficientes para transcender e se tornar um deus do cosmos. Essa daqui foi a interpretação desse mano que eu achei muito interessantito. Aí teve um cara que comentou aqui, ó, algo que eu achei interessante também, que vale ressaltar, é só teorias, mas aposto que German foi um dos caçadores de lá que matou o Cos. Na verdade, matou o filho de Cos, né? Porque o Cos já chegou na praia morto, tem um item que fala isso. E ele não dorme por conta da culpa, talvez colocar o órfão para descansar simbolicamente, ou talvez, através de uma conexão cósmica, facilite o German. Por isso que ele fica mais aliviado depois que isso acontece. Pode ser também que aqueles sonhos que o German tem enquanto ele tá dormindo, que tem algumas falas dessas aí no jogo, que são muito boas, inclusive, eu só não lembro qual vídeo eu reagi a isso. Tá gravado, talvez eu coloque aí na edição. Mas talvez ele ficasse preso àquele sonho quando ele dormia, por isso que deu uma aliviada pra ele quando aquilo acabou. Talvez aquela sombra preta fosse a maldição que faz com que os caçadores fiquem presos ali nesse sonho, daí quando você derrota ele, acaba o pesadelo. E daí por isso que aparece, tipo, o Nightmare's Lane, quando você derrota... Derrota não, né? Quando você bate na sombrinha lá. Pode ser que seja isso. Pode ser muitas coisas. Fato é, tem alguma conexão com German e o órfão de Kos.
He does the exact opposite of everything you tell him to do, but I think he's interesting because I'm confident that the exact opposite of everything he says is true.
I'll spare you one nugget of advice.
Isso daí eu saquei quando eu fiz, hein?
I can see it in her eyes. She deeply resents the young saint. She hears people whisper. She knows what people think of her. Yes. She despises the saint for having what she doesn't.
Truth is, it's the other way around.
É exatamente o contrário.
The blood saint that you saved from Yahar'gul, appears to despise Ariana the whore. Whenever you talk to Ariana, you can actually see Adela eavesdropping on you from the other side of the chapel. It's quite creepy, actually.
Cara, é bem creepy isso. Eu não sabia
these
disso.
Characters have something in common, and
Olá.
it's that they both offer you their
Ela ficou olhando
blood
pra
in some
gente,
sort of
véi.
gratitude for saving them. If you accept Ariana's blood, it reads, "A member of the old healing church would know that her blood is similar indeed to precisely what was once forbidden." Adela watches you accepting Ariana's blood, the jealousy building up inside of her. Imagine, she's watching her savior accept forbidden blood over her own. She has this gratitude to you for saving her, but what you're doing is a great sin in her eyes, and eventually it becomes too much. If you take Ariana's blood more than 3 times before the blood moon, then you explode.
Oxi.
Just kidding. Why did I explode there? I don't know the law on that one. Anyway, I assume it's a glitch, but if you do accept Ariana's blood more than 3 times before the blood moon, then Ariana lies dead, and the blood is on Adela's hands.
Olha só, mano.
I only wish to be of help. Take my blood.
It got me thinking, what could be so wrong with Ariana's blood? What could be so forbidden about it? And now, after working on my last video, which was about Canehurst, it becomes pretty clear. Ariana wears a noble dress, right? And this is a dress that's worn by the nobles of the old bloodline that traces back to Canehurst. And Canehurst is the home to the Vile Bloods,
O
the
sangue
vampire-like humans that rival the healing church of Yharnam. And as Alfred tells us, the Canehurst Vile Bloods are born of forbidden blood that was stolen from Yharnam. So, somehow, Ariana is descended from the Vile Bloods, and Adela knows it.
Oh, my sweet hunter.
Caraca.
Your blood is tainted. I can't help myself.
Que loucura,
This
cara. Eu não
is
sabia
the
desse
chapel
final, não.
dweller. In fact, Yasefka's clinic, by this point in the game, isn't actually run by the real Yasefka anymore. A keen player might have noticed what changes.
Are you out on the hunt? Then I'm very sorry, but I cannot open this door. I am Yasefka. The patients here in my clinic must not be exposed to infection.
Essa é a verdadeira
I
Yosefka.
know that you hunt for us, for our town, but I'm sorry. I pray for your safety.
Oh, well, hello. Splendid. Let me ask you a small kindness. You're soon off to hunt, I presume?
A voz muda pouquinho.
Then, if you find any survivors,
Parece mais jovem.
tell them to seek Yusefka's clinic. Upon my Hippocratic oath, if they are yet human, I will look after them. Perhaps even cure them. This sickness, these beasts, they are not to be feared. This time the night is long. I may be trapped here, but I should do something to help.
I'll even offer a reward for your cooperation. Tempted?
Caramba, mano.
The real Yosefka is this kind-hearted woman who treats a few patients at her clinic and absolutely refuses to open the door, for it would put her patients at risk of catching the scourge. Note how she doesn't want anyone else to enter her clinic. But this all changes once you enter Cathedral Ward, and we never hear from the real Yosefka again.
Os lendários fuçadores de arquivos dentro do jogo costumam achar os conteúdos cortados que não estão no jogo, mas estão ali perdidos nos arquivos. E com isso, muitas vezes dá pra descobrir e interpretar melhor a história do jogo por conta desses arquivos. Porque às vezes, digamos que o diretor ali, o desenvolvedor, vê uma linha de diálogo que ficou muito expositiva, e como é um jogo mais interpretativo, eles cortam algumas coisas. Então é interessante pra gente que gosta de fuçar e saber a história, sabe? Vamos ver.
Furtive great one on a lake of mud. A tall beast with invisible projectiles. Tens of never-before-seen enemies and pages of untold lore. The cut content of Bloodborne has finally been laid bare for us. And so, to quote Mikolash,
Let us sit about and speak feverishly, chatting till the wee hours of my wonderful nightmare!
Okay, Mikolash, calm down. First, the cut bosses, revealed by Zully the Witch. So, those tentacles clawing at you through the fog, that's the first sign that you're not supposed to be here. Well, that and the doorway to nothingness behind you. Upon entering, you emerge onto this muddy coastline, which is very reminiscent of the Orphans Arena, except this place also has the sinking architecture of the Chalice Dungeon, which is really Lovecraftian, if you've read his work. And a few of you may have realized already what this thing is. Take a look at its face. It's the moon presence, though not as we know
Caraca, verdade, o
This
rosto
form it's in
a
is
presença da
this
lua.
flailing mess of a creature that's barely capable of standing upright. I think you can even see its heart sort of hanging loosely below it in this exposed ribcage. It's really weak, though you can see echoes of its former glory when it lifts itself up off the ground like this. And you know what I think this thing is? I think it might be the physical form of the moon presence, preserved in the Chalice Dungeons, as opposed to the consciousness of the moon presence that we fight in the Hunter's Dream. The Chalice Dungeons, after all, are home to the slumbering Great Ones, and some of these labyrinths are in contact with the cosmos, which allows the Great Ones to function, and I quote, on transcendental planes of thought. Many Great Ones ascended long ago, and as we know, these beings up above in the nightmares, they no longer have a need for their body in the physical plane, and it would make some sense for the moon presence's physical body to still be down here. But regardless, it's clearly a very undeveloped boss fight, and it's quite easy as a result, which kind of suits its appearance, really. Kind of like King Alant's true form in Demon Souls. But anyway, speaking of incomplete bosses, this creature, currently going by the name Great One Beast, is this far more agile monster than many of the other large bosses you would have fought in Bloodborne, and I think it would have made for a great fight as a result. It has similar moves to Sif and many other wolf-like enemies in Souls, and just look at that face, it really reminds me of the dragon god from Demon Souls. The Great One Beast. Would this have been a Great One that contracted the plague of beasts, or would it be a Great One that started the plague, perhaps? There's not much else to say here. And lastly, a fight with not one wet nurse, nor two, but three wet nurses. Zully, who is the Chalice Dungeon's host, they muse on whether this is an issue with their illusions spawning but not going away, or whether this was just meant to be a multi-enemy boss fight. It's a bit of a mess, either way. And speaking of Murgo's wet nurse, after you defeated her in the main game, the Hunter's Workshop is set ablaze, you recall. Well, in Gurman's cut content, he has a very interesting response to this turn of events.
We've no need for this accursed abode. Let flame cleanse this house of horrors. These frightful things, look at them burn. All ye hunters, let it be known. We are free! Free as the wind!
Nossa, mano, a dublagem é muito boa.
The end is not far away now. Every last dream will burn out, and Flora will return from the moon.
Flora é a...
As for us, the time has come to honor our vows.
O eminente da lua lá que
Hunters are needed no longer.
Peraí, deixa eu voltar que eu fiquei falando, né, velho?
As for us, the time has come to honor our vows. Hunters are needed no longer. You and I shall fight to the death, and she will consume the victor. The way we've always said we'd end it. You recall? Oh, Lawrence. Of course you remember.
There's so much information here.
Caraca,
Though
muita
there is
mesmo.
only really one solid piece of information we can take from this cut content, in my opinion, and it's that the moon presence is called Flora, as we had previously guessed. The rest of Gurman's cut dialogue is a bit contradictory with his in-game dialogue. First, Gurman celebrates the burning of the workshop, stating that hunters are free as the wind. But in the actual game, Gurman would have remained bound to the dream even after it burned out, which is evidenced by the fact that the dream continues even after we take his place. So are hunters really free? Second, in the cut content it seems that Lawrence and Gurman were originally supposed to fight for the right to be consumed by Flora. That's weird. Gurman and Lawrence always struck me as really ambitious characters. Look at what they started and look at what they achieved in Yharnam. It doesn't really fit to me for these old friends to fight to the death for the right to be eaten. I can see why this might have been cut. What is more in line with Gurman's story is this next bout of dialogue, because it seems that at one point, Gurman was far more vocal about his willingness to leave the nightmare and about what will happen when he dies.
What were you thinking? If I die, you are to be next. What is it you want from this horrific nightmare? What? Looking to free me? Then I graciously accept.
Olha
Forgive
só.
me, Lawrence. I could not wait.
In-game, they ended up making Gurman far more reluctant to give up the dream, which I really like because it speaks to his strong sense of martyrdom and self-sacrifice. But what still remains unclear in the main game, and even in all of this cut content after all this time, I think, is what Gurman hoped to achieve in the Hunter's dream, and what he's waiting for Lawrence to achieve in the outside. Do you remember this line of dialogue?
Oh, Lawrence, what's taking you so long? I've grown too old for this. Of little use now, I'm afraid.
That's not cut content, that's in the game. Lawrence, first vicar and founder of the Healing Church, was supposed to do something in the waking world while Gurman was in the dream. The question is, what? And the answer, at least at one point, might have been ministration. Writer DMC Redgrave, who is one of the best analysts of Bloodborne's lore, once wrote that Gurman is desperate for Lawrence and the art of blood ministration to find someone who can put an end to the nightmare, who can find a pale blood strong enough to become immune to the taint of the Great Ones. So with the revelation that Gurman might have been waiting specifically for the effects of Lawrence's blood ministration, it appears that Redgrave may well have been right. His Pale Blood Hunt document will be the first link in the description. It's one of the best resources on Bloodborne's story to date, as many of you already know. But to those of you who don't, do yourself a favor and set aside a couple of hours to read it all.
Nossa, eu quero
Of
ler
course,
esse
there could
rolê
be other
aí, hein?
reasons Gurman is waiting for the effects of Lawrence's blood administration. For example, Lawrence's Beast's Embrace rune shows that he was trying to control the Scourge of Beasts, and maybe ministration was a way of doing that. And also the Metamorphosis rune also speaks of how their discovery of blood made their dream of evolution a reality. So perhaps Gurman was waiting for ministration to achieve these things as well. But it's been years, and I'm not sure if we'll ever know for sure. And as it turns out, the one who administers blood to us in the opening cutscene originally had more to him as well.
Welcome, weary traveller, to the great city of Yharnam. The troubles you must have seen. Your homeland plagued by a sickness that spares few. You suffer, your loved ones suffer. It's like a curse. But there is hope for you yet. The blood used in ministration, the trade of Yharnam, is a special thing indeed. The only thing that can cure your sickness.
Interesting to note the mention of a plague-afflicted homeland outside of Yharnam, and that blood was a trade of Yharnam, suggesting that blood might have made its way out of the city. These things are especially relevant if we're getting an extension of this world in Shadows Die Twice. And it seems also that you were supposed to exchange a few lines of dialogue with the minister after the transfusion.
Woken up with something of a nightmare, have you? A foul, murky story? Quite beyond my own reckoning? Won't that be something to tell the grandkids, eh? Oh, but I've nothing more to tell. I only show the way. And the way has been shown. Now, it's in your hands until the dank, sweet mud takes us all upon the awakening of Ebrietas.
Upon the awakening of Ebrietas. Ebrietas is fairly central to the story, as it is this great one who works together.
Só ver o que ele escreveu ali. Ah, tá. Depois que ele ouviu o nome, por isso que ele pronunciou de um jeito diferente, né? Ebrietas.
Upon the awakening of Ebrietas. Ebrietas is fairly central to the story, as it is this great one who works together with the choir, looking to the skies in search of astral signs which may lead them to the rediscovery of true greatness. As the quote-unquote left behind great one, it seems that Ebrietas did not ascend with her kin, and so its awakening might have originally been more important to the story. Anyway, it also appears that you could kill this blood minister if you so desired, revealing that Yharnam may well exist in a sort of pocket dimension, as expected.
My death matters not. It's your nightmare, after all.
But the thing I want to talk about is that in the cut content, there's this common theme of characters being far more aware of the dreams that they actually reside within. I like the information this provides, because now we've heard German muse about his capture within his hunter's dream, we've heard Mikolash brag about his new real world, and so too do we hear Maria lament our progress through the nightmare of the old hunters.
A visitor. How unexpected. Then the secrets of the church have been laid bare. Good hunter, lost in a nightmare. What did you think of that beastly legend and those ailing wards of the church? I know what you did to them. It's not your fault. The nightmare held them, and now they are free.
This beastly legend she refers to could be Ludwig or Lawrence, though Ludwig is closer and within her building. She mentions the ailing wards of the church too, which would have been her patients in the research hall that you killed up to this point. Interesting also to note again that dying in a nightmare is a way to be set free, something that's reinforced in the base game with Mikolash.
Now I'm waking up! I'll forget everything!
And with German.
Be freed from the night.
Maria then tries to coax us out of the nightmare.
But what about you? Have you profited at all?
If you answer yes, she commends you, and she tries to gently lure you out of the nightmare with yet more profit to tide you over. Remember, Maria is likely here far more willfully than the other hunters cursed to remain in this nightmare, as there are signs that she has a lot of guilt about what the hunters did here in the fishing hamlet. So, if you answer yes, I have profited from being here.
Oh, really? Well, that's a relief. Now you can leave this nightmare. Have respect for the beast hunter Gammon's wishes. Besides, you will not find your enemies here. Take the relics in this room as your parting prize. Let them be your strength. And return to your hunt, good hunter.
It's so curious that she says that Gammon wouldn't want you to progress further. Perhaps because the events here were what led to his beloved Maria's death? If you answer no, I haven't profited enough from this nightmare, her tone is far more wary, because basically you're saying you're not satisfied, and this indicates you may well want more from this nightmare.
I thought as much. Nightmares and secrets, they'll only get you so far. Now you can leave this place.
You could argue that a lot of this dialogue is redundant, but I love how this fleshes out her character and her tone, especially the bits where she says, good hunter, like the doll. Yes, it's cut content, but it's
Verdade, ela fala igual a boneca, mano.
not the kind of cut content that contradicts with what we already know. This was likely removed as a stylistic choice, as they probably wanted the original cutscene to be shorter and more punchy.
What's wrong, my hunter? Don't you hear the hunt calling? Or do you wish to tease something more from the depths of this nightmare? Even if it means my murder. Look at you. That glint in your eyes. You, girl, are insufferable. Oh, I know very well how the secrets beckon so sweetly. Only an honest death will cure you now. Liberate you from your wild curiosity.
And there's a lot more dialogue than this that I haven't put in this video because I haven't got around to extracting it yet. And not only that, but you need to check out everything in the description, because down there are videos by people capable of extracting never-before-seen assets and character models from the game as well.
Cara, olha o tanto
There
de
has been
coisa.
some really
Parece meio
amazing
Dark Souls
work
esse vídeo.
done in the last few weeks, and it's awesome that a game this old can get so much fresh blood, so to speak. You should also check out the Bloodborne remixes by Alex Rowe, the perfectly tweaked
Nossa, que
soundtrack,
loucura, mano.
which is a perfect backdrop to this video about cut content. I say this a lot, but this description box is full of some really good stuff, so don't
Olha esse
neglect it.
bicho.
Patrons will get access to my notes on the cut content that I haven't mentioned in this video, as a thank you to everyone who's pledged to the Beacon tier and above. But to lead us out, I'll pass over to Gascoigne, whose cut dialogue has interesting implications for the next video, which is going to tie all of the Soulsborne storylines
Ele fez
together.
vídeo tentando unir todas as histórias do Soulsborne.
Rest in peace, Mbassa.
I'll see you soon.
Ele manda passa. Esse cara aqui é bom, hein? Já dá vontade de ver os próximos 8 vídeos dele depois de uma dessa, mano. Depois de assistir tudo isso, eu acabei gravando mais 2 horas. Então, no total, foram 5 horas só pra fazer esse vídeo aqui, que é um simples react. Mas eu tentei juntar essa grande investigação em um vídeo só. Nas melhores coisas que tem nesses vídeos pra gente colocar aqui. Porém, é muita coisa e eu acho que vale a pena, sabe? A minha vontade era colocar tudo na íntegra pra vocês. Só que realmente é muita coisa. Eu dei uma passadinha aqui pelo Bloodborne Story, Fada Gascoigne, tem o do Alfred, que é o do Sangue Vil, né? O Caçador de Sangue Vil. Tem o Jura também, que é muito bom. Então, todos esses vídeos têm ali 7 minutos, 11 minutos, tarará. Só que eles não são só sobre o personagem, ele dá meio que um background de tudo, chega no personagem, fala várias curiosidades. Então é muita informação. Infelizmente eu não vou poder colocar aqui pra vocês, mas caramba, que delícia de jogo. Que absurdo, velho. Eu adoro esse tipo de jogo por conta dessa quantidade de coisa. Tudo tem um motivo, tudo tem um significado. Se o NPC tá vestido com uma roupa X, é porque tem a ver com de onde ele veio, tarará. Aí daí se ele fala XYZ, tem tantas interpretações que mostra mais sobre ele. É uma coisa, assim, incrível e nada expositiva. O oposto de expositivo, qual é? É isso, porque realmente você precisa pensar bastante pra entender tudo. Ou ir atrás de um vídeo do VAT. Então é isso. Deixa a recomendação pra vocês do canal dele. Claro, dê uma olhada também no comentário fixado, porque lá vai ter a Play English. Tem no comentário, na descrição do vídeo também. E no próximo vídeo a gente tá de volta, tá bom? Tamo junto demais, até o próximo vídeo. Tchau, tchau. E eu fui. Tchau, tchau.